Present.
Yes.
Marty,
Present.
Chairman McDaniel.
Present.
You have a full quorum.
Thank you very much. Again, welcome everyone. Welcome to the public. And again, I'll apologize for the technical difficulties we encountered yesterday. There was a significant breakdown of the YouTube platform, which came back up, and we did our best to get that streamed live as quickly as possible. And hopefully today we'll encounter no difficulties so that the public can see this meeting live and in person, so to speak, as it progresses. Lots to do. Yesterday was a great day, and we accomplished quite a bit. And today I see we still have a very full agenda, as we always do. So let's begin. And we're moving forward to item number 23. Lauren Truitt, our Assistant Director of Information and Education, is going to give us an update on state wildlife areas, which has generated a lot of interest here in the last 6 months or so. So Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair McDaniel, Director Prinsloo, Commissioners, Lauren Truitt, Assistant Director for Information and Education. I will hopefully give you some time on your agenda back this morning. We are in the early phases of planning the next meeting for the state wildlife area work group. If you remember when we talked about this in January, and as we went into your March commission meeting, when we implemented the state wildlife area pass, which is now on sale through the iPause system, that we were going to take a phase 2 approach to this conversation. This phase 2 approach, we will be bringing back the work group that we convened last fall winter timeframe. We will be looking at how we reduce recreation pressure on the wildlife and on these properties. What that looks like is still being discussed. We'll bring back the group of 15, the 3 commissioners that sat on that group, as well as 3 staff members to facilitate the conversation of what does the next iteration of this conversation look like? How do we reduce recreation pressure? How do we bring these properties back more in line with their original intent, which is habitat, wildlife habitat, protecting corridors, protecting their birthing seasons, and very critical wintering grounds. I would be happy to answer any questions. The pass went on sale May 1st, so we're still working through how the public interfaces and working through walking some of our newer customers on purchasing those passes. But most of our customers are in the system. They're getting their state wildlife area pass, and we're off to the races.
Thank you, Lauren. Any questions or discussion? Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren, and to the committee for all the work you've done. And so just a couple. One, when you say you're going to be looking at sort of the traffic issues and crowding, we also talked about, I think, the next phase also being the uses of these areas. And so restrictions, those types of things. Are you going to be looking at that as well?
Yes, thank you for the question, Commissioner Garcia. We will be looking at the uses, working with our field staff who has a very intimate understanding of what's happening on these properties, as well as using this stakeholder user group to inform that conversation from multiple perspectives.
So is it too early that you'll be coming back to, my gut tells me that we'll be doing it on an area by area basis, individual wildlife areas. Is that fair? And will you be coming back with those sort of recommendations, or is that going to be maybe at a third phase?
Talking with the director, I'm not sure that we'll go property by property. I don't think it really is the intent to look at 350 individual properties. We're really looking at this more at a global level, really looking at the system as a whole and what is compatible. There is a parallel conversation internally right now on those properties and property use as well. So these 2 tracks will run parallel. We'll bring these recommendations back to the commission for consideration.
That's great. And finally, on this wild pass, if it gets through and we end up with it, I know I've asked Bill Sack more than once that it appears that it will not include state wildlife areas, but that there's some discussion that we may want to start looking again at some of those wildlife areas to include them. Is that part of the work you're doing as well, to take a look at that?
I might punt that to the director.
That's not, great question. It's not specific to their group, although that internal group it is. And I suspect what I would say there's not many, but some wildlife areas that look like city park or state park kind of amenities, not state wildlife areas. And so we are looking at those specifically, whether they be included in the past. I'm open to that, but it's not a linear discussion.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Other questions or discussion? I have one for you, Lauren. So any data yet about, you said it started to be sold. How many? Is it similar to what we thought or what we saw when we were requiring selling or the possession of a license?
That's a great question, Chair McDaniel, and I'll have to get back with you on the numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's it. No other questions? We will move on to agenda item.
Luke has a question.
Oh, there he is. Luke, there you are. Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to recap. Lauren, what's the rough estimate on when that state wildlife area working group would need to come back together and meet?
Great question, Commissioner Schaefer. We're actually sending the email out this afternoon with a doodle poll for the work group members to try and find a date that works best for everybody. We're going to look at a half-day kickoff meeting to dig into the conversation, and we'll probably have subsequent meetings over the next few months. My goal is to have this conversation and the recommendation kind of wrapped by August so that we can bring it back to the commission this fall for implementation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. Last check. Commissioner Judson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, it's got a little bit of an answer to your question. I bought one yesterday or the day before at James Rod State Park. It took about 3 minutes, and I've got it in my back pocket if you want to check it out. But it was seamless and looked just like a fishing license. I was actually delighted to be able to buy that pass. So thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchton. Now I think that's it, Lauren.
Thank you.
You're off the hook. Thank you very much. I appreciate the update. Now let's move forward to item number 24, which is an update on the Outdoor Wilderness Lab program, or it's called OWL. And I believe we have Greg Weckenbrock and Mark Allen here to present to us. So welcome, gentlemen.
Well, good morning, commissioners and attendees. It's a pleasure to be able to come here and tell you all about the OWL program, Outdoor Wilderness Lab, here in Gateway, Colorado. CPW, and I'm kind of new on the scene. I'm Mark Allen, the principal at Gateway School. It's a K-12 school along with the Outdoor Wilderness Lab. And I've been working with Greg and Maria Dool and your cohorts, Kirk and Trina and Kathleen, for the last 2.5 years. And I just have to say, it's just been a pleasure and a lot of fun looking at the opportunities of how we're taking the outdoors and bringing them to District 51 sixth graders. It's been such a joy, and it's going to get better. So this morning, what we want to do in 20 minutes is really try to culminate some updates and give you all a picture, if we will, of what's been happening and coming off of this year of pandemic. What does it look like for the next year following? So we'll just kind of jump right in. This is Gateway, Colorado. This is kind of an overview on one of our lookouts. Gateway School was in the need of developing its programming, and what a fit it became for Al, who was in search of a resting place where we could execute all of these wonderful outdoor activities. And Greg Weckenbrock here next to me, he's the lead teacher in the program. He's really been the brain trust behind it when he was at Brookcliff Middle School. And I just really came along with him and Maria and sort of said, hey, if we bring it to Gateway, I'd like to be a part of that. So Greg's going to have more on that in a minute, but I just want to celebrate this last year. We've had 1,350 sixth graders come through on day trips up through the program. So thanks to CPW, your staff, Kirk's leadership, and Kathleen and Trina, we're off and running. And I think you're gonna see some really exciting things here for 21 and 22. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg and let him kind of tell you a little deeper about what's happening.
Okay. Quickly, if you want to, in your free time, go to outdoorwilderness.org. You can click on the video listed here. In the interest of time, I'll skip it. It's only about 6.5, 7 minutes long, but it's a great promotional video, and it really shows, if you're unfamiliar with OWL, what we do, what we're about, and the experience that kids have while they're there. But I'll go ahead and continue with the presentation here, so we can get to the exciting parts about this year. Our story really, as Mark mentioned, has brought us to Gateway, Colorado. We're actually in our 9th year of operation. We began in year number 1 as a pilot program, fully sponsored by Colorado Parks and Wildlife through our local office here, and it was a partnership with the Mason County School District 51, and we took 33 students that first year. And from that first year, we've grown. We stayed in that pilot status for the first 5 years. And then we began expanding from there once we realized the need to offer our services to more students was present. And there was a high interest from the community. We began growing. And I think, as Mark mentioned, we've been on a pretty significant growth process and upward trend as far as how many students we can accommodate year after year since then. And like I said, we really are in year number 9 at this point. What's significant about this photo is it is Gateway, Colorado, and it represents the most major move that we made after year 7. We moved to a school district facility that's fully owned and operated by School District 51, as Mark mentioned, the Gateway School, and it's the perfect home for Outdoor Wilderness Lab. It was a great win-win at the time to use a district facility and combine it with an outdoor school. So we officially got off the ground last year in March, and we had 3 great sessions before things, pandemic kind of forced the school district to go into a remote learning environment, and but our vision remains the same. This is the vision that was crafted by our steering committee. It's to engage every D51 learner in unique learning experiences that explore conservation and natural resources in our local environment and empower health and wellness for our learners. So that's kind of the guiding light. Our mission is to get every single student in 6th grade in School District 51 to OWL during that 6th grade year. So that represents about 1,600 total students. And as I said before, last year, our first year of operation in Gateway, we really got through 3 school groups before things went remote. But this year has really been a story of, in our opinion, great success and accomplishment. And as far as our flexibility, adaptability, and our ability to pivot and find the best ways to serve kids that we can in the pandemic environment. So I kind of gave you the story there, but it's listed in bullet points. The last bullet point there is kind of where I'll talk about next. Our main standard programming is a 3-day, 2-night, 2 overnights offering, where we really focus our curriculum on environmental science and self-discovery, leadership, social emotional skills, and we find that that's really powerful. I should mention, in the first 7 years, we took students for 5 days and 4 nights, so for a full week, and it's that's pretty similar to Jefferson County and other school districts around the state. However, in an effort to try and accommodate the most amount of students possible, we decided to shorten it to half weeks, so we could, in the short term, achieve that goal of 1,600 students. So I'll just continue a little bit here. The land, as we mentioned, we operate out of beautiful Gateway, Colorado. We serve students from School District 51, and actually most of our students, despite Gateway and the Gateway School being part of our school district, most of them have never been out there. A lot of them haven't heard of Gateway. It's 54 miles southwest of here, and if you've been there, you know it's absolutely gorgeous. And that natural beauty really speaks for itself. But for most of our students, it's a truly eye-opening experience, and it's their first time going over the hill, as we call it. So using the land, we focus on developing outdoor classrooms, and what we call outdoor classrooms are pretty minimalist. Honestly, we try and use just the natural, I guess, the natural environment, the components that are there. In order to bring out that learning environment, so students don't feel like they're in a classroom or even really something that's been engineered or manufactured to look a certain way, but rather they're out in a natural setting doing their learning naturally. Focus on the staffing. We've added a number of staff over the last 2 years. You can see listed here. This is really, I think it demonstrates the school district support to what we're doing, and it allows us to provide the best possible services for students.
I might, just on that previous slide, Greg, our partnership program is not just with CPW, but we want to involve other agencies. We want this to broaden in its instruction, but also in its availability to interns. So we're looking at CMU, the AmeriCorps, to help lower our costs, but to give those students experiences of instructorship, of being involved in if this is something you want to do as a career. And so it all kind of comes together in a curriculum and a programming way, but it's opportunities. And so that's kind of part of our mission as well.
So when we talk about that vision and bringing the vision to life with 1,600 students a year, the first problem we had to resolve was how do we actually construct a campus that can accommodate that. We chose to use the tent cabin facilities here. So again, to folks like you and I, these probably look like really fancy tents. It's kind of glamping, but again, to most of our students, they feel like this is roughing it. And so we really achieved that goal of getting them out to a new space, because curriculum-wise, we find that if we can kind of transport them from their comfort zones here in the Valley over to something truly new, it builds on what they're able to do and the capacity for learning they have throughout the experience. Oops, sorry for that. So you can see the total map here. This represents 3.6 acres, the Gateway School. However, the Gateway School borders a number of private properties, but the landowners have been very accommodating and excited to see us expanding our operations. In fact, you can see this area marked in green here represents an additional 160 acres approximately in which we have a land use agreement with the landowners, and so you can see in yellow those represent trails that we've installed for student learning. Each one of the X's there represents classrooms that we've put in so that students can do their best learning outside.
And the topography in this area is wonderful for future activities. When we want to go to different biomes, ecosystems, we can do that with the John Brown Pass up here and heading off to Sal's. It gives us a wonderful range to teach geology and all of the things that are interactive with abiotic and biotic organisms. So it's a classroom unto itself. Really, it's a rich area. Target rich? Is that the word? Go ahead.
Yeah, it does represent about 1,000 feet in elevation gain. If you go all the way to the tip top, of course, we haven't been able to walk all that far up there with sixth graders because they tend to walk a little slower. But we do take them up to those lower classroom areas daily. That's an integral part of their learning. So I referenced curriculum before, so one thing that we feel like is really important to us is maintaining a high academic rigor, high academic standards. We are a school district after all, and so something that we've had to prove to our school board is that this isn't a field trip or a day camp or something, you know, extra or supplementary they get to do, but it's an embedded part of the students' learning during their 6th grade year. So all of our curriculum is standards based. It follows, and I guess it's woven into the curriculum of the 6th graders and their normal curricular experience as they go. So we work hard to make sure from sun up to sundown, they're really doing as much learning as possible. Of course, we like to have, you know, a few of those camp moments too, and those camp culture type things. But, you know, as a teacher for the last 12 years and you know, Mark's experience as well, we really put a high focus on academics. But sometimes that really catches the kids off guard because they're used to, you know, the bell ringing at 3 o'clock and they can go home or go on to the next part. But at 3 o'clock an hour, the day is only half done. So we put our last lesson number 7 is actually after dinner, and we go out and we do a night hike with them, or we do bonfire and adaptation lessons. And, you know, I just find that by having them there on site, we can really control their learning quite a bit. So we tend to see pretty good results that way. We also have been able to use high school counselors from our local high school. We take about 50 counselors a year, and we make them part of our staff. So they actually take a class at their high schools to learn some of the leadership skills that they'll be asked to use while they're at OWL. And they fill that perfect niche for in between, you know, adults like us and 6th graders. So the 6th graders really look up to them, but I find often this group gets as much, if not more, out of the experience in the high school or than the 6th graders themselves. So I apologize for the font just being a little bit off there, but I'll let Mark take over for some of the highlights from the screen.
So we've had 8 middle schools served. We ran day trips. That was we did get that okayed, you know, with the health department, and lots of, that you all know, went into each district around the state, and then each district's different. But we've been pretty static on the Western Slope, and so we were okay to run the day trips. So 1,350 kids were representative of either coming up to the site or staying at the school, and Greg and his team would go to the school and service their outdoors on their field. But I think 5 schools chose to come up to Gateway, so it worked out really well. And you can't believe the amount of storm that created, because siblings go home and they tell their brothers and sisters or mom and dads about, hey, you know, and there are tents there, and I think we're supposed to spend the night. And so that's happening next year. And so there's just a real great fervor in this year of just, you know, tragedy for many people, where we've been you know, closed down. And I think there's some optimism that's really healthy for the district and the kids and families that we're going to serve next year. So excited. So we'll go to the next slide. Fall instruction. I'll let Greg expound on that, but that we took this year to really do some facilities changes on the site that we otherwise wouldn't have had time to do. So it really worked well. And Greg worked with the staff of the AmeriCorps volunteers to we just buckled down and drove all of those projects home that we otherwise wouldn't have time to do. And that was creating a nature trail, which goes up on that yellow line that Greg was alluding to earlier. The challenge course, which is a ropes course for kids, and the archery range. These are self-discovery kind of team leadership building exercises that are part of the program. We have the classroom awnings that in inclement weather we were able to develop. This is GOCO money, much of this, which is really powerful. Man, did it come in handy, and it's just going to serve for years to come. We added a 6th tent, and we have a new restroom facility, which we're still working out, but it's coming for fall of next year. And over to the left of that visual, there's the gym. Behind that 3rd tent is where the restroom will go. That's a temporary restroom right now. By the way, that's last year we had an interesting young man who was in the overnight session. We did happen to get 3 in before we were closed down. But this gentleman spent much of the night in this restroom. This is one of those banquet restrooms. where you put in weddings, it's real luxurious inside. Some of these kids, they couldn't believe it. You know, when they walked in there, they didn't want to come out. It was so cold in March. This young man said, you know, when a mic was shoved in his face, we said, what's the highlight of your trip? He said, I'll tell you what, I've never been in a nicer restroom than that one. So he just made us all laugh, and it was great. Great to hear it.
So just a couple visuals again. Feel free to go to the video mentioned in our website outdoorwellnesslab.org for a couple of highlights and really how we've brought the vision to life. We couldn't. You can see here, happy kids learning. That's the goal.
And connecting the dots. You know, you learn so much in the classroom, but out here you begin to really connect the dots. Why did I learn that? How does it relate? And so there's some nuggets that are hopefully going to continue to be enlarged as we get better at what we're doing.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say it wouldn't. You know, Mark has mentioned your support and GoCo over the years. Obviously, it's I wouldn't be. I would never have got off the ground without the support of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And so we're just eternally grateful for that. And it's a continued partnership, and we're really excited about that, as well as other partners from the community. We really feel like that's what has finally got our school district to be as fully invested as it is, because there has been a lot of support from our local community here. So with that, we just wanted to talk a bit about the plan for next year, because we are excited about what's to come.
It's real quick. I'll just say fall and spring, we're going back to our 2.5 days. We expect every school to participate. We've had great interest from charter schools, academies outside the school district. So I think we're going to fill the schedule, barring we don't have anything happen with this pandemic. But I really think we're coming into full normalcy again, and we expect some really great operation and programming to happen and take place. I would also add that the staff of CPW, all the officers that come up and help with the weekly instruction, has been powerful for us, for the students, and I think for them, because it's just, again, a big part of us connecting what we do every day. And CPW has a story to be told. And it's being told when kids interact with your officers and they begin to say, hey, you know, how come you have handcuffs and a firearm, and what's your role, and how do you protect wildlife? And so there's again, subtle story that's being able to tell another generation about what and the importance of what we do through Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I think that's important. I think there's a real discrepancy right now with our future generations really understanding the intricacies of the outdoors and how we need to introduce some education to make sure they're ready to make those important decisions. Thank you again for all your help and your support. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. So really, we heard about it before. It's an incredible story. Can't thank the two of you, and I'm sure many more other volunteers for the time and the investment they made. You know, we talked about the future of conservation, the future of sporting, you know, whether hunting or fishing or whatever in Colorado recreation can be. You know, engaging kids early, getting to love the outdoors, probably not a more important thing we should do. So personally, thank you very much. I'd open the floor now to questions and comments. Start with Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. You know, it's like some of us, and I remember Mr. Dawson's 6th grade class, Flagstaff, Arizona. We all went to Camp Colton. And I really think back about how much that seeded who I am now and how that's framed, you know, my interest in the outdoors and wild spaces and all that. So it really is, I think we obviously know from the research and the experience that these are our future stewards. These are kids that are going to care. Hopefully it breaks the screen time and all the other things, obviously, I think we know that come from it. So I would just say thanks for the program. I'm going to put in dibs for hosting this meeting in Gateway next year. Just putting it on the record. It's a possibility. Just saying.
Don't look at me, look at Director Prinsloo.
Possibility. You might have to talk to the resort down there about a little bit better rate, but I was curious, you obviously mentioned, oh, and by the way, there's a college or university that's missing on your screen, so I'll talk to you about that later. I was wondering, in the relationship with GoCo, if Gen Wild program, how that overlaps and if there's been an opportunity to sort of coordinate with those activities. Obviously funding, obviously got that down, but just curious, maybe Emily has some comments on that as well.
Yeah, we haven't done much with Generation Wild. I know it's, I know it's something that's out in the community, and we certainly see signs in the parks and things like that, but we haven't directly, partnered with that or in a meaningful way.
And we have a lot of work to do. And part of it has been kind of stifled with all of this happening this year. In public education, we're fairly bureaucratic and slow, similar to other agencies in our government. And so with all respect to that, we're getting back on our feet. I think people are recognizing what are some opportunities. And our staffing has been very skeletal. We move very slowly. Greg and I are continuing our efforts to say, in order for us to broaden our scope and sequence and programming, we need some key people. And so, there's some folks that are still understanding Al that are above us that are trying to say, with economics in mind, how fast can we grow? So I hear you loud and clear. There's probably not just one, there's several of those.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This story really resonates with me. It's compelling, and I want to commend the people who are responsible for beginning this and putting it together and making sure that it continues. I can't thank you enough for this out-of-the-box thinking, and I hope that we can do everything we can to support it and maybe help this expand into other areas of the state. But I think it's fantastic. I just want to thank you gentlemen and everybody who's involved with it.
Thank you, Commissioner May. Commissioner Adams.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. I just want to echo the comments around just how incredible this program is. The evidence base is very clear on the impacts that nature-based education has for not only our students, but for our educators, our leaders, and those who participate. So it's wonderful to hear the impacts that are happening directly for the staff CPW staff that are participating as well. It's also wonderful as a founder of a public charter school in Aurora, Colorado called New Legacy Charter School that serves high school age students as well as early learning. So we have infants through 5 years old there. These types of nature-based programs are very inspiring. And so I appreciate the efforts, and I also appreciate the range of partners that you're working with, recognizing that our issues that we face with our lands, wildlife, and waterways are not solely environmental ones. The educational piece is absolutely critical. I know that Colorado has been updating their environmental education standards, and I was curious if your group had an opportunity to weigh in on those drafts, as well as just the budding relationships with the Colorado Department of Education. So I'd love to hear your comments or thoughts or visions as it relates to deepening the relationship with Colorado Department of Education, so that we could potentially scale this to other communities, as well as the updated environmental education standards and if you all had an opportunity to weigh in on those drafts.
Great, thank you. Great questions. Greg, can you address the standards part, and I'll take the other.
Yeah, right now, the curriculum is tied to the next generation science standards that are used statewide with CDE. So I think that's really the heart of each one of the lessons, and the lesson plans is written toward those standards. Environmental ed standards, those are something that's always, I guess, part of the process, but our focus is to make sure our curriculum matches the curriculum that they have in their classrooms with their classroom teachers, essentially. So,
right. Okay. I'm sorry. Point of clarification. So oftentimes you want to create standards alignment that is not just for one, those interdisciplinary options are always exciting. And so my specific question though was, did you all have an opportunity to weigh in on the environmental education standards. A lot of the work that you're doing aligns with that. And so I would love to have your expertise of the last, 5 years of y'all doing this program involved as the entire state is working to strengthen those. It is my understanding those are also aligned to the science standards as well. And again, this is a rich opportunity where we are looking for your expertise to really make sure that those environmental education standards are aligned to the other meaningful standards, but also representative of what you're seeing in the field. The different curricular materials and strategies are things that we may want to elevate to a standard. And so I would love to make sure that we're harnessing the incredible knowledge and expertise. Because the work that you're doing, this nature-based education, though, has been in existence for as long as humans has been in existence. It has not been a deep part of our public schooling system. So it's very exciting what you're doing. And that's why I'm asking these follow-up questions. So it doesn't sound like you have. Happy to make those connections. Curious the relationship that you have with the Colorado Department of Education. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, not directly. We have not been. It's been through the school district. So that's another effort, Ms. Adams, that we really do need to pursue in terms of more intimately with, in terms of, letting them know what we're doing and how we're doing it. Again, the scope and sequence for us recently has been to lift this off the ground in conjunction with
Absolutely.
and it's been a chore.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, not to use that as an excuse, but I think.
No, it's not an excuse. If anything, I'm trying to make sure that you get I heard you say skeleton budget, right? And skeleton resources. And so I'm just trying to think as a commissioner, I don't have the responsibility of the day-to-day, but I do have responsibility, right, over the strategic vision and, oversight. And so, I know that resource allocation continues to be a strategic priority for us in financial sustainability. And so, as we look to differentiate our funding streams, I think, I had an amazing conversation with the science director at Colorado Department of Education, who is very interested in nature-based education and environmental education. And so I think that's someone that I'm happy to make connections with you so that we're working smarter and not harder to really make sure that this program not only continues and expands, but can potentially be replicated to other communities like those in Aurora, Colorado, which is where the school that I helped to co-found operates, and who would can benefit tremendously from nature-based experiences like the ones that you've shared today. Thank you so much for all of your efforts. Again, as someone who has created something from scratch, I know how difficult it is. And the fact that you all have done such an incredible job is a testament not only to your determination, but to the skills, expertise, and commitment of the community, of CPW, and of our state to do this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I would just add, I welcome your input, and I would love to touch base with you, and maybe you can help lead us in that direction so we can be more effective in communicating how we're doing it, so that recipe can be duplicated, because we want to try to do that at different grade levels too. So
absolutely. Oh, this is just music to my. If I was here, if I was there, you could see my goosebumps. Certainly happy to help in any way. Obviously, I'm also thinking about the talent pipeline as well. Right, you mentioned, you're doing career exploration is what you're doing, right, in these nature-based settings as well. And so I'm wondering, how are we connecting the dots? And, I've asked a couple of times, so I'll go ahead and ask again, because it would be great to see how this OWL program fits into the overarching educational programs and services that we provide at the agency. I'm noticing that for programs like yourself, that there are some incredible programs and that are available. And there are some educators and districts and schools that I speak to about what they're doing elsewhere, and they're like, wait, that's happening. And so just want to, recognizing we have limited bandwidth. And so that's why I'm trying to, offer my support and identify additional strategies that could potentially help with the fiscal support and sustainability, as well as just more general skin in the game. So thank you so much, and happy to feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to follow up. And if there's other commissioners that are interested in this topic around educational services, I'm happy to collaborate with you all as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. I need to have to move us along here. We're falling a little bit behind in our agenda. We had, I believe it was Commissioner.
Go ahead. Well, I just wanted to say thank you.
I know you did, so that's why I wanted to give you the floor. Commissioner
I
Heskett.
love your passion for teaching kids, and thank you very much.
Thanks. We enjoy it, and thank you for the support again.
And obviously you see all the interest here, and again, thank you gentlemen for appearing here today in front of this commission, and I'm sure you see and hear from all the agency folks behind you and the commissioners how much support you have. So again, thank you.
Chair, I just wanted to, before you run, Commissioner Hauser ran out, but she and I are the GOCO reps from CPW, and we have some GOCO folks in the back. We wanted to thank you as well, and maybe we can get you out to our meeting out west here this fall.
Love to. Thank you. Thanks.
JT, there's something you want to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really briefly, JT Romansky, Northwest Regional Manager. I want to personally thank Greg and Mark. These guys are obviously humble individuals, but without their vision and tenacity, we wouldn't be where we're at. This is a remarkable thing that's come to fruition here. Started 7 years ago with Frank McGee and Greg, and I was the area manager, and I was like, yeah, let's try and do something, you know, and every officer in Area 7, Kathleen, Trina, Kirk's done a bang up job taking it over also. And so I just want to thank you guys and Emily for her support too. So thank you very much.
Thanks, JT. All right, well, that concludes item number 24. So let's move on to our agenda to 25, and we have set aside, since we're have a topic of a wolf update later today, specific time for public comments on the wolf reintroduction planning. So we're going to do that. Katie, I see you there on the screen. You ready to lead us through this?
Yes, thanks, Chair McDaniel. I'm Katie Lanter, Policy and Planning Supervisor for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We did have quite a bit of interest and comment on this topic this morning. We have about 15 people that are signed up. We'll start with our county commissioner comments. I had 4 county commissioners signed up. So far, 3 are with us. The county commissioners will get 5 minutes each, and then our members of the public will get 3. And we will, I will tell the commissioners when you have 1 minute left and when your time is up. We're going to start with Mike Sampson, and that'll be followed by Don Supps. So if we could get Commissioner Sampson unmuted. Are you there, Mike?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, and it looks like your video is coming up too. So you should be ready to go.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Commission for allowing us to provide comments regarding the appropriate local government role in developing the plan for wolf reintroduction. We all know Proposition 114 stated that wolves would be introduced in designated public lands west of the Continental Divide, which means up to 22 counties could see introduction. Each of those counties are unique in nature and have varying land use applications. However, every one of them has jurisdiction by law with respect to any environmental impact involved in a proposal for action affecting the quality of the human environment. This is the very definition of a cooperating agency. Associated Governments of Northwest Colorado, AGNC, represents 7 of those counties west of the Continental Divide, and we are formally requesting that the Commission establish a local government advisory group to work with the Commission, CPW staff, and the 2 advisory groups already established. We understand that the Commission has the authority under Section 33-1-105E of the Colorado Revised Statutes to enter into cooperative agreements with state and other agencies for the development and promotion of wildlife programs. Counties are subdivisions of the state, and as such, have local knowledge and expertise regarding the environment, local socio-economic conditions and needs, as well as local customs and cultures, which should be considered in a program of this magnitude. Local governments have regulatory authority as well as land use and resource management plans that need to be considered in the plan. AGNC requests this group be established. It is very unlikely that local government issues can be addressed adequately by the limited opportunity provided through the Stakeholder Advisory Group. Our members request that the local government advisory group include at least 2 counties representing each of the 4 state designated planning regions with public lands west of the Continental Divide, and other regions across the state should they have an interest. It is envisioned that this group not only participate in the planning of wolf introduction, but that it will be a group to provide input to the ongoing management and monitoring of wolves after initial introduction. Creating a local government group in the fashion of a cooperating agency will allow the commission to develop a plan with a greater depth of knowledge and a more comprehensive understanding of the areas impacted. In short, a better plan. We only have one chance to get this right. For these reasons, AGNC respectfully requests that the commission adopt the proposal to establish a local government advisory group for the development and implementation of wolf introduction into Western Colorado. Thank you for your time and consideration of this request. And as a side note, AGNC would also like to say thank you to JT Romansky for his efforts in Northwest Colorado. JT's work has been great with local governments, and it's gone a long way in working to restore local confidence in CPW. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sampson. We appreciate the feedback and comments. Any questions at this time for Mr. Sampson? I don't see any, Mike, so thanks again for providing your comments today.
Thank you.
All right, next we will have Don Suppis, followed by Tony Bohr. So if we get Don unmuted, Don, would you like your camera on?
Sure, that'll be fine.
Okay, you may have to hit admit or accept on your end. There you are.
We got it. Perfect.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commission, for giving us a chance to give testimony here today. We greatly appreciate your time. Appreciate all you do. You know, I want to start off this thing with, you know, our founding fathers of this great nation warned us of the dangers of mob rule. When a certain segment of the population can suffer because a majority voted that they should do so. That's kind of what's happening here. You know, we're getting this forced upon us by a majority that has aspirational environmentalism. You know, they don't understand the concepts of what's going to take to make this happen. They don't understand the ramifications of this happening, but they thought it would be the environmentally right thing to do, when we all know that it's not. And we all know that the ecosystem will suffer because of this. Human history has never done well when we introduce a foreign species into a current ecosystem. We all know that, so I'll get on to the points. Number one, there's 2 industries that are going to be hurt by this: grazing and hunting. We all know that the grazing industry is incredibly important in Colorado. Delta County grazing industry is our #1 industry. We see more revenue into this county from grazing, from the cattle industry, than we see from any other industry. And this is going to hurt. So on the grazing aspect, I'm encouraging you to make sure that you have proper compensation for loss. This has been a big issue, not only the compensation, but the burden of proof for that compensation, making sure that the bar is not set so high that is unattainable, and also where that funding comes from. I know that you guys got your hands tied a little bit by the legislature on how that money is going to get to you to pay for that compensation, but we can absolutely not afford to hurt the hunting industry, which is the next topic of discussion here. we have seen a steady decline in hunters enter our area, which is a huge part of our tourism economy. It's a huge part of the fall revenues that we see into our county, into all counties in Western Colorado. We cannot afford for this decline to happen anymore. The way that, tags are purchased, auxiliary licensing, tag fees, waiting times for preference points. All these things have led to a decrease in hunting revenue, hunting economy in Colorado. We can absolutely not afford to hurt this industry any more than we have already. The other thing that is not thought about a lot during the passing of this bill that I know you guys have given incredible amount of thought to is our existing species. We all know that we already have wolves located in these areas. There's been studies done, there's been visible sightings, CPW has confirmations. All we're going to do is harm that existing population by bringing these in, and you guys know that. We need to be smart how we do this. We're also going to harm our other predator species, the bears, the mountain lions, all these other species are going to suffer. The lynx that we spent so much money bringing into the area is going to suffer because of this transplant. The prey of the wolf is also going to suffer. We see huge issues with our deer and elk populations moving into residential areas because they're chased out from the predators.
1 minute.
The wildlife is suffering in this area, suffering in Western Colorado. The numbers are hurting. We've got to find some way to protect those numbers. The other thing that we have to be considerate of is the human to wolf interaction that we know is going to come. It may not be a lot, but it is going to come, and it's going to be something that we need to be concerned about. And lastly, I just want to push that we have a local advisory group. County commissioners throughout the Western Colorado have asked for a cooperating agency type group that we have some input on how these decisions are made. With that, I will close out my talk here by just thanking you once again for giving us the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you, Jonathan, for appearing before us today and providing us your feedback and comments. Any questions for Mr. Supplier at this time? I don't see any done, so thanks again. Appreciate it.
All right, our next commissioner that we'll have off is Tony Borer. Our fourth commissioner I didn't see join, but if I see him join, we'll bring him forward. While we're getting Tony unmuted, and Tony, would you like your camera on?
Yes, please.
Okay, there we go. If I could just make a quick housekeeping announcement to the public that we have participating, just a reminder that we will, call on you and help you to get unmuted and your cameras on. And also, please refrain from using emojis or anything like that in the Zoom. The opportunity to participate, is built on trust here, and we just ask you to please adhere to our protocols so that we can have you participate. With that, thank you, Commissioner Borer.
Yeah, thank you. What's that?
I said welcome.
Oh, thank you, sir. And thank you for your time. Good afternoon, commissioners. I am Moffat County Commissioner Tony Booyer. Moffat County requests you give serious consideration to the April 5th, 2021 letter that the Associated Governments of Northwest Colorado provided you through our attorney. In that letter, AGNC outlined a request for the Wildlife Commission to establish a special advisory group to Colorado wolf planning process made up of elected county commissioners of affected areas. We propose this special advisory group function much like cooperating agencies function in the federal planning process. The Attorney General, Phil Weiser, wrote a letter to the Wildlife Commission on May 3rd, and I quote from that letter, "I strongly urge the Commission to include a greater role for these voices in the reintroduction planning effort. We owe it to both the Western Slope and the entire state to not limit their participation in informal stakeholder discussions or through public comment session, end quote. Moffat County has expertise in partnering as a cooperating agency and protecting confidential information. Elected county commissioners have expertise and authority that no other interest group speaking today can offer. And the BLM and the Forest Service has recognized this for years. County commissioners have land use, zoning, and planning authorities. We are responsible for public health and safety. We understand the social and the economic and the cultural realities within our communities. We can provide tax district data, provide our private property concerns, tourism and recreation impacts, and can provide staff expertise and data on discrete confidential basis. Our proposal is not a new concept. Moffat County has 2 decades of history of cooperating agency partnerships. We, along with other AG&C counties, conducted a similar effort while the state redrew the sage grouse maps. We will not usurp CPW. They still make the final call on wolf introductions, and CPW must honor the intent of Initiative 114. We understand that. We request you provide counties the opportunity to meaningfully participate in the drafting of the wolf introduction plan as requested in the AG&C letter. We are simply asking for a seat at the table, not just as someone that can give public comment, but actually having the information prior to it going public and being able to weigh in on that point. We are not asking for anything that is crazy or out of this world. We're just simply asking to have a seat at the table because our counties and the people that we represent are going to be affected by this reintroduction. And so we ask you to please consider us to be able to sit at the table as elected officials of the state of Colorado and of our counties. We just ask you to let us sit at the table and speak on the behalf of our constituents, on behalf of our of the other species that we've helped reintroduce into the state. And with that being said, I will not take any more of your time, and I thank you for your time today, and we ask you to please consider our request. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate your feedback and comments today to this commission. Any questions? Commissioner Touchton for Tony. Could you hold on for just 1 minute, Tony?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Commissioner. I had 2 questions. I'll just lay them both out and then go back over to you. One is if we were to establish this separate county-only advisory group, does that mean the counties don't want to participate in the stakeholder group, or are you requesting both? That there's some county representatives in the stakeholder group, and you have your own independent county-only group? And then so that's one question. My second question is, we've established actually 2 things: a stakeholder group and a technical advisory group. And I'm wondering if your concerns as land managers and public safety regulators, whether you would be satisfied with participation in the technical advisory group, which holds other land managers and other governmental entities. And so if you could just give me some feedback on those 2 questions, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, and I can only speak for us, right? But I believe what we're asking is if we need to be on the technical advisory group is fantastic. I feel like if you're just going to sit at the table and get the information as it's fed to you and then speak about the information there, to me, that doesn't make much sense. As an elected official for our counties, we want to be at the table helping write the plan for reintroduction. I think that we would be happy at any table, right? I mean, I feel like our voice has not been heard much in the last few years during this process, especially on the western slope of Colorado. Obviously, our requests were most voted no on this thing, and yet we're still having to fight this. And so we want to be at the table where the most significant impacts would be. So if that is at the advisory table, that's where we want to be. I just feel like it needs to be a standalone elected official table. Knowing what our constituents are, we're going to be speaking more than just from a personal opinion. We're going to be hearing the voices from our constituents that are going to be facing the realities of wolf reintroduction on a daily basis, whether it's from the outfitter or the rancher, whether it's for, to the ones that are trying to protect sage grouse. We are going to be speaking for a broad view, not just a personal view. I don't know if that answered your questions or not.
Yes, no, thank you for that feedback. If I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Commissioner Trustee.
You gave me another idea, which is, as I read the letter from your attorney, one of the arguments you made was that you wouldn't have enough representation on the stakeholder group because there'd only be 1 or 2 spots for elected officials. The witness before you, I don't know if he got to hear him. He mentioned grazing and hunting as the primary concerns. And I assume those are major constituencies in Moffat County as well. What I'm wondering is if there's really a lack of representation for the underlying interests, because county commissions would have 2 spots on the stakeholder group. Hunting interests will have 2 or 3 spots. Agricultural interests will have 2 or 3 spots. So I see that your constituents be pretty well represented on the stakeholder group. There may only be a couple spots for the political representatives, but the fundamental interests at stake, whether it's grazing or hunting, would be well represented on our stakeholder group. So I'm wondering if you still feel that we have to create yet a third thing, since we've got already 2 groups to advise us. Now it's a suggestion we have a third. So could you speak to whether or not hunting, grazing, and county commissioners aren't all well represented and overlapping on the stakeholder group?
Yeah. So I think when you get to the 2 seats out of how many ever seats is not that, who gets to pick? Is that going to make sure, are you going to make sure it is from the counties that voted no? Is that the 2 commissioner seats there? I think when we get to the elected official, we're not asking for you to just put on the elected official seats just people that counties that voted no. We're not asking that. We're just asking for an elected official seat at the table where we can help have this conversation. I think when you pick two ranchers, 2 outfitters, 2, to me, that's not representing all of the counties. And I understand you can't represent all of the counties. I understand that you would have 64 seats at a table and nobody wants to chair that board. I guarantee that. But I feel like just having 2 in such a big deal that we are trying to reintroduce wolves that are going to affect many places over the years. You reintroduce them into one area, we understand that it's not going to stay in one area over time. They are actually going to be going into other areas, and over time it will affect multiple counties. And so I would hate to just say, hey, we're going to put 2 people on there from elected officials and say, hey, these are the 2 that are going to represent all of them. Are you going to put one that is for wolves and one that is against wolves, or are both of them going to be against it? Or are they both going to be for it? I mean, I would be wanting to understand what those realms are.
Thank you. Any other questions for Tony this time? I don't see any. Thank you very much again for appearing before us today. We certainly appreciate your thoughts and your feedback.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
sir. Thank you for your
Chairman.
time.
Sorry, I don't see your hand up.
McDaniels, sorry. Uh,
Go ahead. You have a question? You're muted, Commissioner Adams.
Oh, sorry, unmute. Thank you so much for raising this issue. I think I would agree that having 2 seats, you know, I appreciate the opportunity to revisit having 2 seats as the sole mechanism for that specific stakeholder group, especially in light of the regulatory and policy components that you all lead in and are will be impacted by these decisions. And so we need to have that perspective expertise at the table. Wondering if there are existing convenings of our Colorado County commissioners, and if there are ways or mechanisms that we can, if there are ways that we can piggyback on existing convenings of all the county commissioners to be able to get the feedback at the aggregate from that community and be able to disaggregate, following that information. But just curious if there are other convenings. You mentioned that I think USDA and BLM often come to the county commission level, and just curious again if there's a statewide county commissioner meeting, annual meeting, regional meetings, right? How can we essentially, is there a way that we can leverage existing convening structures so as not to exacerbate our already stretched, staffing and resources around the wolf issue, and particularly in light of all the other issues that we're facing. So just curious about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's multiple groups, but CCI I think represents all of the counties in Colorado. So you have a mixture of opinions and stances on
And
everything.
CCI, do they convene? Do they have a regular convening or schedule, or your face doesn't instill me with confidence that that's the appropriate space though. Is there one that you would feel is appropriate, or?
Pardon me, Commissioner Adams, first, if you could let Tony finish answering the question. And second, I'd ask that at this time, just to give everyone a warning, I really kind of have to move on. So if we could keep our question, and Tony, could I ask you to keep your response pretty short? We got a long list of folks who want to chat with this commission today. So certainly appreciate all the interest in your thoughts, but if we can keep that short, we can move on. I would certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I do appreciate the time and the questions, but CCI, I feel like John Swartout and that group have multiple different groups in there that they could talk with this. I think AGNC is a great opportunity to sit down and talk with them and be able to petition them and have an open dialect conversation and an intelligent conversation where it's not just arguments from both sides, but an actual intelligent conversation of what's the best for this process. And that's what we're looking for. We don't want to argue. We just want to make sure it's the best opportunity for both sides to make this. We know it's going to happen. So we want to make sure we all have our say in it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams, and Tony, thanks for speaking with us today. Katie, can we move to the next speaker, please?
Yes, so now we'll be doing our general public comment at 3 minutes apiece. So I will give a warning when there's 15 seconds remaining, and then when time's up, we will do mute. So we'll start with Danielle Betancourt, who will be followed by Gary Skiba. Danielle, it looks like you're up and ready to go.
Yes, thank you. And good morning, commissioners. As you said, I'm Danielle Betancourt, and I'm actually counsel for AGNC. So it's good a follow-up from what the conversations that they just had. But as you had heard, AGNC would like to propose and encourage the commission to create a local government advisory group composed solely of the government officials to collaborate with the commission on the gray wolf reintroduction and management planning. The commission has this general authority to enter into cooperative agreements with political subdivisions, associations, and individuals for development of wildlife programs under Colorado Statute 33-1, 105E, and under the Proposition 114 statute to obtain public input in the reintroduction of wolves and the development of the plan. The statute also requires the commission to acquire information on the scientific, economic, and social considerations for reintroduction of gray wolves. And as you kind of already heard from the county commissioners, those that are the most knowledgeable about how reintroduction of gray wolves will impact these areas in the Western Slope are the local officials from the impacted counties. As a political subdivision of the state, the county is vested with governmental power and land use planning authority to provide for and protect the public health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. And then further, under Colorado Statute 2920-104, local governments have the authority to protect lands from activities that would cause immediate or foreseeable material danger to significant wildlife habitat, to regulate the use of the land to minimize the impact thereof on the community or surrounding areas, and to plan for and regulate the use of the land to provide planned and orderly use of land and protecting of the environment. These local government specific authority and special expertise is distinct from any other interest group, and it would be of significant benefit to the commission and a critical component to developing a prudent gray wolf reintroduction plan. And therefore, AG&C is strongly encouraging the commission to use its general statutory authority to include all the impacted local communities in developing a more robust gray wolf reintroduction plan, and through the creation of local government advisory group that could work alongside the commission and the other two stakeholder groups. And I just kind of like to bounce off of what Tony said on, SAG already providing that opportunity. And I think you kind of hit on it already, but the fact is, allowing only 2 county commissioners on that group doesn't represent every county in the Western Slope that could be impacting. They all have their own different land use plans, their different interests, their different expertise, and how things impact their economy at the local level. And so I just don't think, having 1 or 2 to represent, the 20 who potentially could be impacted is just not sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any questions at this time for the speaker? Seeing none, thanks again. Appreciate your comments and feedback today.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll have Gary Skiba, followed by Kareen Mahuna. Gary, it looks like you're up and ready to go.
I am. Thank you, Katie.
Gary, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniel, and thank you for you and the commissioners and the directors for giving us the opportunity to comment. My name is Gary Skiba. I'm a wildlife biologist who retired from the Colorado Division of Wildlife in 2010, and I was the biological lead on the 2005 Wolf Management Plan. I'm currently the Wildlife Program Manager for the San Juan Citizens Alliance. I'm speaking today in opposition to the request from the AG&C for a separate local government advisory group. The commissions of Moffett, Rio Blanco, Routt, Mesa, and Garfield counties, who are the main players in AG&C, have all passed resolutions that oppose the passage of Proposition 114 or that seek to thwart the scientifically sound restoration of wolves to the state by declaring themselves unavailable as locations for wolf restoration. Their bias against implementing the will of Colorado's voters is clear. As envisioned by AG&C, the local government group would have special powers. As stated in their letter to the commission, the local government group would, and I quote, be granted certain privileges to review pre-decisional information and assist the commission in developing planning components and drafting potential language. If such opportunities and special status are given to the counties who continue to oppose the will of Colorado voters, they should also be granted to those who worked for the restoration of wolves to Colorado, including the multiple conservation groups that worked under the umbrella of the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project. The wolf management planning process adopted by the commission has multiple opportunities for providing input, and the AG&C proposal mischaracterizes those opportunities. The request implies that the stakeholder advisory group is a decision-making body, when the reality is that the commission has made it clear that both the stakeholder and technical working groups are strictly advisory. The commission has the authority and responsibility to make decisions based on a broad range of public input, including that provided by county governments and the recommendations of the professional staff at CPW. Ceding any portion of that authority to another entity is inappropriate and opens the door to the erosion of the commission's authority. Counties have multiple opportunities for input, both formally through the extensive process adopted by CPW and informally through existing contacts. Anyone who's worked for state or federal government in Colorado is fully aware of the influence that counties wield. One need only look at this comment session where county commissioners appropriately get more time to address the CPW commission than other members of the public. If, and only if, such a group is formed, it needs to represent all Colorado local governments and reflect the election outcome, and therefore should have majority representation from counties that voted to support wolf restoration. And if the commission were to grant special status to the counties west of the Continental Divide,
15 seconds.
you should recognize that 22% of those counties and 37% of the voters in those counties supported wolf restoration. If the commission grants the request to create a local government advisory group, you will have ceded some of your authority to a group with a perspective that is intentionally biased against the desire expressed by the majority of voters in Colorado. Please don't.
Time's up.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate your comments today and your suggestions. Any questions for the speaker at this time? Seeing none, I think we're ready to move on, Katie.
Great. Next, we'll have Karine Mahuna, followed by Rhonda Dern. So we'll get Karine unmuted. Karine, would you like your camera on?
Sure.
You may need to hit accept on your end.
Okay.
There you
All
go.
right.
Ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Karine Mahuna, and I thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I have some grave concerns regarding the request of the AGNC to establish a separate wolf restoration advisory group consisting solely of Western commissioners. Based on past experience, it would appear that the county commissioners are easily influenced by individuals such as Denny Behrens and the Stop the Wolf Coalition, including its partners Hunter Nation, NRA, ILA, Big Game Forever, and the Safari Club International, to name a few. These well-funded organizations have had an undue influence on the wolf management policy of many states. Indeed, through their propaganda, which perpetuates myths and falsehoods about wolves, they have persuaded state legislators to usurp the duties of state fish and game departments and to take it upon themselves to legislate laws dictating wolf management that is contrary to the recommendations of wildlife biologists and commissioners. Last year, the majority of the Western County commissioners signed resolutions stating that they were opposed to wolf introduction. Each resolution was almost identical as they were based on templates delivered to the commissioners by Stop the Wolf members. These resolutions contained blatant falsehoods, all of which were dispelled in the educational webinar CPW presented on April 28th. Stop the Wolf is now trying to persuade counties to pass wolf sanctuary resolutions based on their latest template, and most likely is the inspiration behind this latest request by the Western counties for their own advisory group. Given that many, if not most, of the county commissioners are involved, primarily concerned about the agriculture and hunting industries, it is apparent that their interests are already well represented on the technical advisory group, stakeholder advisory group, and among the CPW commissioners as well. As a January commissioners meeting, staff indicated that the technical advisory group would most likely consist of CPW staff, USDA APHIS, USDA Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Department of Agriculture, tribal representation, and state and wildlife agencies. The potential stakeholders advisory group could consist of wolf advocates, livestock producers, local county government, at-large citizens, environmental, sports persons, and academics. It would appear that the Western government's concerns regarding livestock and hunting industries are already overwhelmingly represented. Beyond the representation on the working groups, Western government officials have also been meeting regularly with Dan Gibbs and Director Dan Prenslow, and also have the opportunity to submit comments and information at the public meetings and through the forums and online comments. While they seek to attain greater representation for themselves, they are simultaneously seeking to deny non-consumptive Coloradans, who make up 90% of our population, or one designated voice on the CPW Commission. How is that fair? Please support the majority of Coloradans who voted for Proposition 114.
Thank you, Karen, for your comments and feedback today. We very much appreciate it. Any questions or comments for Karen at this time? Seeing none, thanks again. And Katie, we can move on to the next speaker.
Next, we'll have Rhonda Dern, followed by Gail Bell. Rhonda, would you like your camera on?
Yes, please. Thanks.
There you are. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to share my comments with you today. My name's Rhonda Dern. I've been reading a lot about the new volunteer group, the Assisted Governments of Northwest Colorado. I see from your site, you're a group of volunteers that want to promote the values of industries and economics in Northwest Colorado through forums and education. Looking at your stated values, I'm asking you to withdraw your request for a separate advisory group and instead come together with all of the values that we share in Colorado that will be beneficial in bringing wolves home to Colorado. In addressing some of the members specifically from your group, Mike Sampson, volunteer from Garfield County. With your teaching background, Mike, you could guide teachers in Garfield County on setting up curriculums that are science-based for the children to learn about the value of our keystone species, such as the gray wolf. Your student councils, who you have a background with, could become leaders teaching a new generation of Coloradans, using science, not old myths that are just perpetuated today. Chris Nichols, your volunteer from Craig, business owner. Wolves are good for business, Craig. Wolves bring tourism. Wolf watching brings tours, bling, clothing. Craig could have a Canis lupine clothing line. There's big business to be had with wolves. Keely Ellis, volunteer from Rangeley. You are involved in economic development and an executive assistant to the president of Northwest Community College. You could bring the magnificent Living with Wolves exhibit to Rangeley. Your students and community and all of Colorado would benefit from them. Cody Davis, you're a 5th generation Coloradan. Wolves are native to Colorado too. They're not a foreign species. So you need to have groups that understand science instead of old myths. There's a new era of Coloradans that see the benefits of sharing our lands with our native wildlife. You could invite the Tom Minor Basin ranchers to help you learn conscientious coexistence strategies. Tom Booher from Moffat County. As a county commissioner, your role is to govern responsibly in accordance with the state constitution and to follow the laws of Colorado, right? 32-2-105.8 is the law of Colorado. Grady Hazelton, your volunteer from Newcastle. You work to give everyone with different values, I see, the opportunity to come together to churches and community events. You could hold events after church services on how we can be better stewards of all of God's creatures, especially those that are unjustly persecuted, such as our wolves. Now's the time of members in this group to come together and be real leaders in their counties by working together to bring wolves back. We have doomed the wolf, not for what it is.
Time's up.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Your time is up, but we appreciate your feedback and comments here today. Any quick questions for Ms. Bell at this time? Don't see any. Again, thank you for your feedback and comments. Katie, we're ready to go to the next speaker.
Next, we'll have Gail Bell, followed by Terry Fankhauser. Gail, would you like your camera on?
Yes, please.
You may have to hit accept on your end. There we go.
Thank you. Can I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. As our country is experiencing what is considered a very sobering and realistic threat to our democracy and to our voting rights, I am requesting that CPW oppose the will of the people by respecting the honest implementation of Proposition 114. The public lands on the western slope of Colorado, as do all public lands in our country, belong to all of the people. The Western Slope County Commissioners, in their attempt to influence CPW's implementation of what is now law, is an attempt to undermine that most sacred democratic process, the vote of the people. One person, one vote. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Gail, any questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, again, thank you for your comments. Katie, we're ready for the next speaker.
Next, we'll have Terry Fankhauser, followed by Tom Zieber. Terry, would you like your camera on?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're ready to go.
Welcome, Terry.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniels. Thank you, members of the commission. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll be brief. Proposition 114, which is now a part of Colorado's revised statutes, is the law of the land. This commission has been clear. And I think those of us even that opposed wolf reintroduction into Colorado have been clear by indicating that it is law of the land. And we're not here to relitigate, redebate, or revote on what is law. What we're here to do, and you're here to do, is to implement a process that really does epitomize solid due diligence, respect for both the species and things that species will affect, other wildlife, but also the citizens of Colorado. And no one is being excluded from this process. In fact, what I believe the county commissioners are asking for, which we support, is the ability to recognize those commissioners' responsibility and legal responsibility when it comes to land use planning. They have to balance a number of things that affect citizens and other species, and they have a statutory and even constitutional obligation to do so. So by further engaging those commissioners in a fashion that's respectful of that obligation as a government entity, I think is a responsible process for the Wildlife Commission. Ultimately, remember, Colorado's Parks and Wildlife Commission is responsible for implementing this law. And it's not if the wolf will be introduced in Colorado, it's how the wolf will be introduced in Colorado. And more input seems to be logical to that end. So with that, on behalf of our association, our membership, we do support this request and believe that it's both timely and responsible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Any questions for Terry at this time? Seeing none, again, thank you very much for providing your feedback today. Katie?
Next up, we'll have Tom Zieber, followed by David Ruane. Tom, it looks like you're up and ready to go.
Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniels and the commissioners and the staff of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I wholeheartedly applaud the efforts each of you has brought to the table to restore wolves to Colorado, and I'm pleased to see that the process is underway. Personally, I have had experience in Yellowstone working for the Wolf Project as a biological technician. I've tracked wolves in Michigan, and I worked with captive wolves here in Colorado for a number of years. I benefited from the testimony given during the recent educational session, and I look forward to the next ones. One item of note was that both presenters mentioned that outside of Yellowstone, opportunities for viewing wolves in their native habitat were extremely limited. It seems to me that Colorado has a golden opportunity to offer such a program for the public to enjoy wolves in such a manner, that is, their native habitat. Parks and Wildlife has led the way with their Watchable Wildlife program, and going forward, I would hope that this program could be extended to Canis lupus. And this is especially relevant as wolf watching is best done during winter when they're very visible, and shoulder months when tourist revenues in many locations throughout the state are often at their lowest. I am, however, more worried about the recent petition by the Associated Governments of Northwestern Colorado demanding that a special advisory group be formed to represent the counties on the western slope. Already, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has proposed a stakeholder advisory group, as well as holding numerous public hearings throughout the region. Many of these county governments have already issued resolutions in opposition to wolf recovery. I don't see how giving hostile actors who are fundamentally opposed to wolf recovery a separate listening platform that does not benefit the public at large, the same public who voted to enact Proposition 114 of State Law 33-2-105.8. Contrary to Attorney General Weiser's recent letter that, quote, those most knowledgeable on how reintroducing gray wolves will impact the scientific, economic, and social landscape in Western Colorado counties, that the local officials will have this information. It has been demonstrated and again that those same officials are the source of misleading facts, hyperboles, and occasionally even outright lies about the current state of wolf management as expounded on by Diane Boyd and John Horn. I hate to slander the good name of foxes everywhere, but allowing Western Slope counties their own special platform is like having said foxes guarding the henhouse, so to speak. CPW will be giving those officials ample chances to make their unfounded opinions known through the same processes that every other citizen is allowed. Why spend more money forming other committees, especially when the formation of said committees will do nothing but generate further requests from every group opposed to wolf recovery or even favoring wolf recovery? Soon this process will be drowning in committees. If any of these officials have any actual real-world experience with wolves, then they should have applied to the technical working group to put that knowledge to use.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your feedback today. Any questions or comments for Tom? I don't see any. Again, thank you very much. Katie, we're ready for the next speaker.
Great. Next, we'll have David Ruane, followed by John Murtaugh. Dave, would you like your camera on?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, you're ready to go.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniel, Directors Prenslow and Gibbs, and the commissioners. I am commenting today as a lifelong and enthusiastic hunter, fisherman, and all-around outdoorsman. I spent a lot of time in the woods, both in season and out. Love being out there, love Colorado wild spaces. I want to assure you today that not all hunters are anti-wolf and against the restoration of this species on the landscape. In fact, there are a lot of us out there that support this effort. It's just that we don't often make as much noise as the other tribe. I voted yes on 114 because, well, it's the right thing to do. And after attending so many CPW commission meetings prior to the amendment, where the public comments on wolf topics were clearly going unheard. And that is the cause of this ballot initiative, to be quite honest. Like others, I've been paying attention to the dialogue, the topics, the focus, and the questions that CPW and this commission have been putting forth in the wolf portions of the public meetings so far. Unless there is a lot more going on behind the scenes, it seems that there is more focus on rehashing and debating old misconceptions about wolves or jumping way ahead to potential or even speculative management issues rather than the mechanics of the task at hand, the actual restoration of the species to the landscape and how to be successful at that. May I suggest, let the wildlife biologists, the very capable CPW wildlife biologists, focus more on the project instead of appeasing the curiosity of the commission and these unproductive arguments about whether we should be restoring the species or not by these Northwest government agencies. May I suggest the CPW engage with the experts that were directly involved in the planning and actual restoration of wolves back in 1995, rather than the current and contemporary wildlife agency contacts that are in a different stage, the ongoing management of the species, especially those contacts from states that have recently proven that management drivers are political rather than scientific. May I suggest we don't lose sight of the fact that unlike moose and mountain goats and rainbow trout and pheasants, this project is about the simple restoration of a native species that thrived in the state until a generation decided erroneously to actively wipe them from the landscape, as they did, these same people, for some other native species, and almost did even for our most popular elk. Give wolves the chance and they will be a valued and integral part of our wild ecosystem in Colorado. Thank you for the chance to voice my comments. I look forward to seeing this restoration project getting back on track and someday hearing the sound of success, the howl of a wolf in the amazing backcountry of our state. Such an exciting time in our state's natural heritage. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David at this time? Seeing none, again, thank you for your feedback and comments. Katie, we're ready for the next speaker.
Next, we'll have John Murtaugh, followed by Sally Thorson. John, it looks like you're up and ready to go.
Welcome, John.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chairman, members of the Commission. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak today. My name is John Murtaugh, and I'm a representative with the Defenders of Wildlife, joining you remotely today from Lakewood, Colorado. It seems there's a common theme of today's testimony, so I'll jump right in. I've followed this commission closely, and I must say I have no reason to doubt that local governments will be heard and adequately incorporated into the process. This commission has proceeded admirably in the process, and I thank you for your earnest approach. I fail to see the need for an additional advisory group at this time. Commissioner Touchton rightly identified that the existing stakeholder advisory group accounts for many of the identities this local government group seeks to represent. If it's true that only 1 to 2 elected officials sit on the SAG, what is to stop local governments from collaborating with these individuals to ensure they are being properly represented? This commission and CPW staff have made clear there is no interest in relitigating the results of November's election. Participants in the planning process for Gray Wolf reintroduction must demonstrate a commitment to progress and not obstruction, regardless of the advisory group. I applaud the creation of the Stakeholder Advisory Group, a body composed of different viewpoints, but I question what purpose an advisory group made up of only one stakeholder type will serve. The entire purpose of a stakeholder advisory group is to create space for stakeholders to share and discuss concerns and explore solutions. A county advisory group would not achieve that level of discourse. It is far more likely to be an echo chamber. The creation of a county advisory group seems to be a solution in search of a problem that does not exist. Finally, I ask that you consider the intent of this request. Many of these counties have taken public positions opposed to wolf reintroduction. What assurances would you have that this county advisory group would operate in service to the mission of wolf reintroduction, and that it would not seek to deliberately delay, disrupt, or altogether halt the charge given to this body by the electorate in November? I ask that you allow the process to proceed without the creation of additional advisory groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments today, John. Any questions for John? I don't see any. Again, thank you for your feedback.
Next, we'll have Sally Thorson, followed by Norman Bishop. Sally, would you like your camera on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my comments. My name is Sally Thorson. I live in Montrose, Colorado, where 23.7% of the voters in my county said yes to wolf reintroduction. Please keep in mind that even on the western slope, there's strong support for wolf reintroduction from constituents. In the following comments, I represent the Great Old Broadsford Wilderness. We urge CPW to consider a full range of options to use the Stakeholder Advisory Group, or SAG, to get the best possible input to make wolf reintroduction decisions. We know that you have the resources with your newly hired facilitator and your human dimension specialist. We applaud the CPW for seeking a diverse group of stakeholders. We also recognize that diverse group membership means there's a diversity in communication styles, decision-making styles, comfort level and familiarity with formal and informal hierarchies of group structure, and different attitudes towards accepting and resolving viewpoints. Director Prenslow's blueprint from January 7th indicates that the SAG will, and I quote, work towards consensus recommendations to inform the plan. We are concerned that consensus may not be the appropriate goal for a SAG with diverse and strongly held viewpoints. Asking strictly for consensus means you will miss out on valuable ideas and opinions helpful in making complex decisions. Some of the literature suggests that consensus may not be the best decision-making model under circumstances such as when people are polarized on issues or values. And this will certainly be the case with aspects of wolf reintroduction. There are other models, including shared decision-making, reporting out multiple recommendations, or providing a set of ranked options that CPW might use to get the best possible input from the SAG, while combining science and honoring values and viewpoints of all group members. As we continue to improve on who we gather at the table, we need to also improve the culture or structure of that table. Thank you.
Any questions for Sally at this time? Seeing none, I think we're ready to move to our last speaker.
Yes, so last up we'll have Norm Bishop, and I would just ask then that members of the public who've joined us for this public comment, that when we go into the break, that you do go ahead and leave the Zoom meeting and continue to listen in on YouTube. Norm, go ahead.
Welcome, Norm. Good to see you again.
Yes, good morning all. Chairman McDaniel and commissioners. You may recall I was a member of the Yellowstone Center for Resources that restored wolves to the park in 1995. During that time, 160,000 people and organizations commented, and their comments were all incorporated into the planning for the 1994 EIS that resulted in the restoration of wolves in Yellowstone. Following reintroduction in 1995 and 96 of 31 wolves, Yellowstone's wolf population rose to a high of 174 in 2003 and has now settled to around 100 in recent years. The park spans 2.2 million acres. Colorado has at least 17 million acres of public protected lands where wolves could live, about the equivalent of 8 Yellowstones. Wolf to elk ratios, and now we're getting a little biological here. You'll forgive me. That was my wildlife management was one of my majors at Colorado State University. I don't know that 3 wolves per 1,000 elk is a threshold at or above which wolf predation has an unpredictable or unacceptable impact on elk populations. But let's assume that a 3 per 1,000 threshold is desirable. With more than 300,000 elk equivalents in Western Colorado, more than 200,000 elk and 400,000 deer that equate to 133,000 more elk after hunters have killed 80,000 of those deer and elk annually, we might expect that about 900 wolves could live in Colorado with no discernible impact on ungulate populations across the western half of the state. Based on what I've learned in the last 25 years in the Northern Rockies, and I hope everyone will be paying attention to those results, heavy-handed management of wolves will not be needed to ensure continued good big game hunting in Colorado's Rocky Mountains, where I began to hunt back in about 1953. Project manager Eric Odell can explain the difference between additive and compensatory mortality. Every wolf or every elk that a wolf kills is actually going to contribute to the well-being of all the other elk out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Any questions for Norman at this time? Seeing none, again, thanks for seeing you again today, or good to see you again today. And I think that concludes our public comment period. Is that correct, Katie?
That's correct.
All right, well, we are just a hair behind time, so we'll go to break now and then reconvene the meeting at 10:30. So Dion, can you cease the recording? Thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. And we're going on to item number 26, which is the Wolf reintroduction planning update. Reed, I believe you have the honor of introducing our guests and leading this item, so I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, are we ready to go? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Reed Wald, Assistant Director of Aquatic Terrestrial Natural Resources, Director, Chairman, Commissioners. Good to see everyone and to be in person. This topic here is a variety of topics that we'll be discussing. We're going to start with the introduction of the facilitator that we've contracted with. But before we do that, I do want to just say a note of appreciation to everybody who worked on it, on the contract and the selection process with it. This was done in record time and in a very expedient process. Specifically, I want to thank Jeanette Barrow, who's a purchasing agent within DNR, and Maggie Van Cleef, who's our purchasing director. Their work was very expedient and great, and we were able to get a facilitator under contract in record time. So with that, I would like to introduce the Keystone Policy Center today. And we have Julie Shapiro and Ernest House Jr. with us today. And they're the principals with Keystone that will be your main contacts, our main contacts for the Wolf facilitation and restoration process. So I'll step back for a little bit. You'll see me here after they're done, and we'll continue on with the discussion. But Julie and Ernest, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Reed, and welcome, Julie. Welcome, Ernest. Great to see you here today.
Well, thank you, Chairman McDaniel and Commissioners. We're honored to be selected to facilitate this important process for Colorado. Our goal today is really just to introduce you to our team a little bit and some of our initial thoughts about our approach, and to take your questions and to listen as well to the conversations throughout the morning. So again, I'm Julie Shapiro, and I'm every button here. Hold on. One of them's gonna work.
Technical help is coming.
All right. There we go. Okay, there we go. After 16 months of being a Zoom Pro facilitator, my first in-person experience, and I totally forgot that. There we go. Again, I'm Julie Shapiro. I'm the director for our National Resources Center at Keystone Policy Center. I'll be the team lead for our team, but working very closely with Ernest and other members. I'm going to have Ernest say hello.
Hello, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces in the room. My name is Ernest House Jr. Mike DeGovan-Boyack. It's an honor to be with you all today. I'm the Senior Policy Director for the Keystone Policy Center and also the Director for the American Indian Alaska Native Program, which is how I just introduced you in Ute. Thank you again for the opportunity. Looking forward to the conversation. And thank you for getting us a chance to get back to a familiar normal by coming here back to Grand Junction and putting on regular pants.
I also just wanted to note we have a deep bench of facilitation staff at Keystone that's going to be supporting this process. So you see us here today. I want to also highlight Callie King-Newman, who's a senior project manager. She is going to be our public involvement lead, working closely with myself and Ernest. And she has a lot of experience doing public engagement across the state on a number of issues. And that is a good transition just to share a little bit more about our team and about Keystone. We're a nonprofit organization with a mission of helping leaders to reach their common ground. We're headquartered in Keystone since 1975, and we take on our mission in a lot of different ways. We design and facilitate public engagements, advisory groups, and coalitions throughout Colorado, throughout the United States, and also internationally. We work in the areas of natural resources, which is largely what brings us here today, as well as agriculture, wildlife management, public lands management, recreation, energy, environment, and also on issues of education and health. So on all of our work, we focus on bringing diverse perspectives together. And some of our work is reflected in the slide you see here, just a few highlights, particularly from our work in Colorado And on natural resources issues, the Route Recreation Roundtable, which is looking at recreation and conservation issues in the route area. The Eldorado Canyon State Park Visitor Use Management Plan, we worked with CPW as well on management for a very high use park. We worked with CPW in the past on the Colorado West Slope Mule Deer strategy, as well as one of the members of NOCO Places, which is in the Northern Front Range, also looking at conservation, natural resource, and recreation issues. We worked on the SCORP in the past, and also with a number of agricultural coalitions, both in Colorado and nationwide. The Next 100 Colorado program has focused on equity and inclusion in the outdoors. Ernest has worked, of course, with tribal engagement in Southwest Colorado, and we can say more about that if you'd like. But again, this is just a sampling of ways that we worked in Colorado on natural resources, and particularly with CPW over time.
I think the only other thing I'd add is the American Indian Alaska Native program is one of the newer programs to the Keystone Policy Center. And it's a great way that a lot of the focus was in COVID response of last year with Indigenous communities, but then also how healthcare, education, agriculture, all cross sectors with Indigenous communities and getting the right appropriate voices also to the table that have not been there historically. So that's also been a focus, is one of the pictures that you see here. Transitioning into the next slide, I have some comments here. As you look at this slide, we know that guiding our approach is our understanding that the controversy over wolf reintroduction in Colorado reflects the unique dynamics of our state. Our diverse communities, complex interests, contemporary rural-urban divides. The goal is the development of a plan. The goal is the development of a plan that can work not only for wolves but for all Coloradans across the state, and especially at the local level in the West Slope communities that will be most impacted by reintroduction. Success requires navigating the various tensions and considerations reflected here. Clearly, we heard that in the testimony that we just heard and will be hearing both in the past, present, and future. And this also includes understanding that this is an issue of wildlife ecology and human ecology and human dimensions. The outcome writ large has been identified by vote, but determining how it is implemented will require collaboration. This is a Colorado focused process that is in the national spotlight and impacted dynamic national and state policies moving forward. Accordingly, we will need a process that is broad, inclusive, equitable, and with focused leadership. That is deliberative and adaptive and expedient and efficient, but then also builds from the 2004 plan and lessons of other states while being attentive to the unique needs and considerations of Colorado in 2021. And being born and raised in southwestern Colorado in Cortez myself, maintaining a home still about 11 miles from the Utah border in a very remote part of Montezuma County, I can understand the importance of all voices being heard and often sometimes being felt like being left out. So know that we hear that loud and clear.
So we'll just share a little bit of the highlights of the draft approach that we included in our March proposal to CPW. The approach really builds from the vision that CPW staff and the commission have adopted with attention to the relationship between public involvement and the advisory groups, as well as the relationship between the advisory groups themselves. We're also considering the overall timeline for plan development, and you can see on this just, again, draft schematic, a timeline that takes place over roughly 22 months or so, with multiple phases of public involvement, interaction of our advisory groups, and of course, coordination with CPW and the commission. Our draft approach is designed to be flexible, to adapt to CPW and PwC commission feedback. So we are meeting with CPW staff next week. So we're just rolling up our sleeves and getting started. Looking forward once again to hearing the discussions today and working with staff as we refine an approach. One thing we want to emphasize is that at all points of the process, the public stakeholders and the technical experts involved should have clarity on how their input will inform CPW's decisions and its development of the final plan with the commission as the decision maker. Our draft approach includes public involvement in all three phases, the convening phase, the plan development phase, and the plan finalization phase. And we have the broadest public outreach happening in phase one, but consistent opportunities throughout the duration, again, in our draft approach. Our intent is to deliver final recommendations by early summer 2023. Should the work move more quickly, timelines can move up. There are many process details in our draft approach, including the who, the what, the when, the where, and most importantly, the why. And that's something we give a lot of attention to as we customize every process design. And again, there's a lot to uncover in the coming days and weeks as we refine this. But Ernest is going to give you just a little more detail on public involvement.
So clearly this is an area that you all heard a lot about, and of course in us at Keystone when thinking about our approach. And our draft approach draws on our experience learning in public engagement throughout Colorado. First, we suggest multiple modes for engaging. This includes more traditional engagement opportunities like public meetings and focus groups, coupled with asynchronous methods of engagement, online comment forums, and so forth. Second, we need to design with COVID-19 precautions in mind. Clearly, we are hoping that we're all moving to a new normal, but we need to design to comfort levels and to adhere to whatever the current public health and DNR guidelines allow. Larger meetings could be implemented in an in-person virtual format, and where possible, in outdoor spaces or set up in a way that allows for social distancing. Because of their smaller size, the focus groups could be more readily in person and could also be done virtually. And then third, Keystone values equity, diversity, and inclusion in our public engagement processes. This includes actively working and creating opportunities to engage with those who will be most impacted by wolf reintroduction, and including voices that have traditionally been left out of the planning process. Virtual and in-person options should be simple and accessible with low barriers to entry. And I would also include that with the emphasis as well, we hear loud and clear on the engagement of the Western Slope and these communities that have voiced, throughout in the past and also today is in public comment.
This is just a final slide commenting briefly on our advisory groups. And again, we emphasized earlier the need for establishing clear objectives. Included in that is making it clear how agreements will be assessed and how we define different terms relative to agreements, so whether it's consensus or majority, et cetera. And we also need to be clear on what happens when those different thresholds aren't met and how perspectives are documented when they're dissenting views. We suggest that the advisory groups need the opportunity to interact and iterate. It shouldn't be a linear process, and it should not be a cookie cutter process. So we have some ideas for a structure and predictability for a process, but we also anticipate being adaptive, including between meetings in order to ideate and iterate, and also based on the feedback of CPW, the commission, and those that we're working with. We would kick off the advisory group processes as soon as we can, once those groups are seated, with interviews to help us understand and frame the issues. And we'd be available throughout the process, not just for facilitation, but also for mediation. Again, we look forward to coordinating with staff and with the commission in the refinement of the approach and adapting that approach throughout the coming year or 2 years or so EMORs. And we thank you for the opportunity to work with you all.
Thank you very much. It'll be a couple of years and it'll seem like a lifetime. It's going to be a very complex project. Obviously, you all were very impressive in the interview process. I'm sure you'll be very impressive in this project. And really looking forward to the agency working with you all. And I'm sure the public will put great trust in you. And obviously, it's super important reintroduction effort being done here in the state. So thank you for coming today, and thank you for introducing yourselves. Questions, comments, Commissioner May?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if you could elaborate on your idea of the public listening sessions, when they might start, how they would be held, the frequency of them.
Sure. Again, a lot of this is draft. So, and knowing that we're meeting next week with staff to refine a lot of this. Our vision is to have public involvement this summer with an intensive series of meetings and focus groups throughout the state in the summer months. And we proposed as many as 10 public meetings and 20 focus groups going to multiple parts of the state with an emphasis on the West Slope in terms of having additional meetings in that direction.
Thank you.
Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, welcome aboard. It's a pleasure to meet you guys, and you've taken on a big job. I had a question. I don't mean to put you on the spot at all, so please feel free to defer if that's the appropriate facilitator response. But we're kicking around a proposal this morning that I think it might threaten to make your job harder, which is establishing a third body in addition to the stakeholder group and the technical advisor group. And as I listened to the argument that the counties have made, I'm reminded of a line from Orwell, Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And I just like your perspective, because it occurs to me that any entity, stakeholder group, can make the exact same argument that they're a much bigger group than they get representation. I'm thinking of indigenous folks. There must be at least a dozen tribes, 500 registered tribes, probably 20 that have ties to Colorado, and they'll only get 1 or 2 representatives on our stakeholder group. And so what I would like is whether you really see a distinction, or is this just between the counties feeling underrepresented on the stakeholder group, or is that just something inherent in any stakeholder process that various interest groups are ultimately funneled down to 1 or 2 folks on a stakeholder panel?
Sure, I'll speak more broadly to the question, and I'm sure Ernest can add in the example of tribes. We're listening attentively, I'll say that, and looking forward to your discussion of the AGNC proposal. Of course, we feel like the interests of all the various stakeholders that you all have identified for the advisory groups, including local governments, are important, and we'll need to engage with them in one way or another through the process. There's different ways we could consider doing that with your input and with staff. But again, we want to hear what you feel is most important. In terms of this idea of how perspectives get funneled down, I think that's once again why it's really important to do this early public outreach, so that we have a wide net cast for opinions to be shared and ideas to be offered. And then I think it's partly the work of our advisory group to also take that feedback, hopefully, and consider it in the deliberations. It's also why we built in public involvement in later phases as well, or suggested it, so that we can go back for additional engagement. So whatever is decided on the local government's piece, again, we look to you all, but we will work with that, and we will work with the various interests of the state to make sure we're incorporating them into the process.
I think and I'm glad you brought up the indigenous as an example perspective, because I think indigenous is a broad, a broad term used with the 2 federally recognized tribes in Colorado that have jurisdictional agreements with the state. It was something that we brought up during the interview process, example like the Bruno Agreement, which is highlighted as a success story between the state and indigenous communities to continue hunting and fishing, on and off reservation, particularly off reservation in southwestern Colorado. But then you also have communities and indigenous groups that have weighed in or offered their comments outside of the state. Colorado is home to 48 historic tribes of Colorado. Took me 3 years to meet with all of those back in 2007. And I also worked with the state of Colorado over 12 years to develop a consultation process that was finalized in 2012. I keep that in mind because I think it's important as the state builds relationships with indigenous communities that were either forcibly removed by treaty or other reasons over the last 150 years that potentially may or may not have an interest in this. And then you also have communities and indigenous members of tribes that live in Colorado throughout the 64 counties of the state. They may, or BIPOC communities that also want to provide their comments. So I think, when we talk about indigenous communities, it's definitely taken in these different aspects that we need to be thinking about, along with other groups that we've already included, like the farming and ranching community, outdoor community, and so on and so forth. So we're keeping that top of mind.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and greetings and welcome. Glad to have you folks from Keystone on board. The question I'm interested in is these focus groups and better understanding sort of what the envisioned role and sort of process is around these focus groups. If you could give some examples of the questions you might be posing and what the loop, the feedback loop might be in terms of incorporating whatever comes out of these groups into these bigger processes.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. So as envisioned, focus groups offer a few flexibilities and opportunities that are unique as compared to broader public meetings. One is that with smaller groups, you can have a little bit more of an iterative dialogue with those around the table, get a little more depth in going back and forth and understanding people's perspectives and also the interests and the reasons behind those perspectives. In a COVID restricted situation, smaller groups also frankly might let us just get into rooms more, depending on the scenarios this summer. Again, as Verna said, we're hopeful to be out in person for all meetings, large and small, but it was one consideration, especially back in February when we were drafting this proposal. So in terms of the questions that would be asked and the way they would be, the information would be incorporated into the process, in the public involvement phase this summer, what we envision is this combination of mechanisms, large meetings, smaller focus groups, online comments, and that all of that would be synthesized and distilled into key issues and themes that could inform the working groups going forward. For any given focus group, there may be some unique charge questions if we're meeting with a particular interest group or a particular community that we could dig into further, and that could be customized. And we also, anticipate flexibility. And again, this is something we really want to talk about with staff as to perhaps going back to some of the same groups over time with particular issues or questions. That's all to be determined through future process discussions, but focus groups could be a touch point for revisiting some of the questions or issues that are raised.
Thank you. Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our Keystone team. Maybe a piggyback on Commissioner Touchton's question. I think having listened to, and I wasn't sure the appropriate time to ask this, it might be later, or just make a statement. And based on the public comment earlier, I think we need to go on record as much as we can to say we're not relitigating this topic. We are moving forward. And I am on record in the past as suggesting, and I don't have an answer as to how we do this, oversampling the communities and the stakeholders where this will occur. I would make that same case if this were happening in the 7 County Metro Denver area. I know that's totally theoretical, or on the Eastern Plains or anywhere else. These are communities where this will happen to them, and it would be great if it's also done with them in a really intentional way. So however that structure plays out, I appreciate it, the reflection and the comment in your slides, that there will really be intentionality around that. So I think for our county commissioners and others who've weighed in on this, the first step in this is trust building. And so if we can focus on that, the rest will fall in place, in my view. That's the role of this commission, and that's the role that we've asked you to play. Fundamentally, probably the most important thing that you can do in this process is to build trust. And then we work towards how we get to sort of the devil's in the details, so to speak. So thank you for that priority. There's a compromise in there somewhere, I believe strongly. We sort of put structure aside, and let's find a way to find that compromise and make sure that those really that are going to be on the ground have input in this, whatever that takes, whatever form that, we've been through a year where technology works great, certainly with prioritizing person, and let's do all of it. However we can do it, let's do all of it, and then let's do more if we have to. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. Commissioner Adams.
Thank you so much. It has been, I've had a pleasure of working with Keystone Policy Solutions in other settings, and have really appreciated the opportunity to work with some of the staff there. And I've had the opportunity to connect with Ernest previously about some things, so it's always wonderful to see you in this role. I wanted to hear a little bit more about how the center defines equity, diversity, and inclusion? What are the actual strategies? How is this different, right, than what we've done before? And I heard you say that you want to engage the historically marginalized communities or historically excluded, as well as I echo the idea of oversampling the Western Slope, and those will be directly impacted by wolf introductions in their own communities, in their own neighborhoods. But just have a curiosity on how the center specifically defines those terms and actual examples of strategies that help us actualize what these words mean. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams, for the question. And I get the question a lot. Actually get the question a lot from folks, organizations, entities wanting to develop land acknowledgements. I think in this day and age, in recognizing Indigenous communities, and I automatically go to a DEI area. I think one thing that I usually bring up to folks in before going into definitions is, to me, diversity, equity, inclusion. I usually ask folks, as an Indigenous person myself, I want to see that. What does that look like? You know, what are the examples of that? I don't want to see an organization just create a land acknowledgement, put it on that year's annual report, and it get shelved and it not being used. And I think that what I've seen, and I hope really what I've worked on over throughout my career, is trying to build those relationships so that whatever organization can point to the success story of that individual or that community that achieved that goal. And so I think that through DEI and this effort is trying to bring those voices to the table that have not historically been there. And I got to tell you, I mean, as in working on a lot of different issues across the state, over 3 governors, we've, particularly on Native American issues, there's a lot of stuff there. And there's a lot of voices that need to be at the table. And so that's the example that I provide. I think with this opportunity, and I know that it's been said before, this is by the chair and other commissioners, this is a heavy lift. I look at it as an amazingly great opportunity. I can't think of any additional words to add in there, because of the potential that it has, because of the potential that Colorado has this opportunity before you all, before us, to be able to create this process of what public engagement looks like, be able to create, how does that correlate also with DEI outreach? How does that create, or even try to bring an example of how possibly we can close the gap between this urban rural divide? You know, I like opportunities. And so, sorry, Commissioner Adams, I hope that rounds about.
No, actually, it would be helpful. And again, I know we're short on time, Chair McDaniel. So maybe it would be helpful to have just how the center defines these terms. I know you mentioned clarifying terms, but it's always helpful to know how people are defining these terms, because they're starting to, unfortunately, when we don't define them, they become meaningless. And I also heard something very inspiring, which is just reimagining the stakeholder engagement process. And I've talked about stakeholder engagement for several months now, and I've noticed some stakeholder fatigue, particularly by historically excluded communities, and a lack of coordination across agencies, both at the federal, state, and local levels. I've raised this issue at the federal, state, and local levels as well, but I hope that you all will be looking on how to address the stakeholder fatigue that I am finding, particularly as it relates to historically excluded communities, as well as those in farming or other communities that don't have the same time allocations or the same numbers to be able to come out, or are not affiliated with these larger organizations that have paid staff to participate in these stakeholder group meetings. So again, not all stakeholders are the same. And I'm excited to see and participate and work with you all and your team on making sure that equity actually means something beyond access, but is inclusive of representation, meaningful participation, and quality outcomes for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, welcome, and thanks for taking on this enormous task. I can't imagine wanting to tackle it myself. I want to echo some of what Commissioner Hauser said. But I have one concern. You mentioned 10 meetings. There's 64 counties in Colorado. It's a big state. How do you plan to reach all of those people with only 10 public meetings?
I should reemphasize this. Thank you for that question, Commissioner. I should reemphasize that the numbers are things to be determined with staff because we can dig in. There's a lot of flexibility about how we approach this. But what I would also just note is that in the way we had originally conceived of this, we might pair these large meetings with these additional trips around the state, smaller conversations, so that we can reach people, not just those who can make it to, the big meeting, but who might also appreciate the opportunity for a different format or a different opportunity. And so we're looking at it holistically, not just the public meetings, not just an online comment form, not just focus groups, but how do we package something and adapt our original ideas towards a final package of opportunities that can meet people in different places. And as Ernest mentioned earlier, whether it's live, in person, and that's the way they want to participate, or through other opportunities to submit comments separately. So we're trying to think about that whole package, and so it's how it all comes together. I think that will help answer your question, and we're looking forward to working with staff on that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. Ernest, long time no see. So I was sitting here trying to think of how many times our paths crossed. Governor Ritter, Governor Hickenlooper, Justice Hobbs, many times. It's really good to see you again. I was one who, when they talked about getting a facilitating group, thought that the commission ought to be involved, not making that decision. I didn't think the division probably could find the right group. They did. When I saw it was Keystone, I said, I couldn't have done better. I'm really glad. But my first thought was, when I saw it, I thought, what were you thinking? You want to take this one on? And then I see Ernest and I think, yep, you've done some tough stuff in your life. And so this is just another bump in the road. So congratulations. Really look forward to working with your group. One thing, and just maybe it's too early on, but I know, Ernest, you've done this before. As I was making notes today, the word civility came up. That's going to be a hard thing for this group and for Reed and the division, is to find that. And so do you have that one little clue you can give us today on how do we find that?
You could use for hours, so it can be off. Well, I have two. I encourage curiosity, which I think helps build empathy. And I always encourage people to try to listen for the best argument of what they perceive as the other side, and try to engage with that. And I think that helps build really good substantive and civil discourse.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. It's good to see you again. And I wrote down a very important point that Commissioner Hauser said, and I often use it as collaboration happens at the speed of trust. And I think that education and the opportunity for people to be heard oftentimes, or lack, or the limiting that opportunity increases the chances for it to be not civil. And I hope that with working with staff and you all and our team, that we can at least somewhat have the public feel like they have an opportunity through multiple different avenues to have their voice be heard, because we have clear opposing viewpoints on this. And we think that no matter where you fall on the issue, we want to hear your voice. We need to have you be a part of this. So we want it to be offered to a place where you can do that. And so I think with what Julie's provided and our process, that's what we're going to attempt to do. And we have heard that a lot of what we were thinking, but we are thinking we can do it, and we know we can.
Welcome aboard. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions at this time. Again, thank you for coming today, and good luck and congratulations on getting this project, and look forward to the next couple of, or 22 months at least, but probably longer, as you think about how the wolf reintroduction will go, and
And it's a long road ahead of us. Thank you. Reed, turn it back to you.
Thank you.
Reed's trying to find out how he can get a chair at the table.
I brought my own commissioner.
We started about 5 after or so we have an hour for the rest. I ask you to stay on pace because we have a commission discussion on the AG and C proposal that I'd like to make sure we complete today. If that works, you think we're in good shape?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, Reed DeWald, Assistant Director of Aquatic, Terrestrial, and Natural Resources. So 3 more topics on the agenda for today. I'd like to give you a glance as to what we're up to with the Stakeholder Advisory Group and Technical Working Group. Assistant Director for STIG has been critical to the Stakeholder Advisory Group as well as his staff, but due to COVID protocols, I'll present that today. So I can see him sitting behind me from where I am. But update on that, we had over 150 applicants for the Stakeholder Advisory Group. We've had a first level review from staff. We convened a group of staff from all across the agency to score and categorize those applications into whichever group people applied to be in. And we're moving through that process. It's now the leadership team for another review, and then it will head to the director and the chair for final selection of that Stakeholder Advisory Group. We hope to have that group seated by the end of May, no later, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks if we can get our work done quickly. But as you know, going through that many applications is an incredible amount of work and a heavy lift. But we are progressing, and I would say we've had some just outstanding applicants all across the board, and it's neat to see the enthusiasm and people wanting to be part of this process. So the Stakeholder Advisory Group is moving on at an expected pace. The Technical Working Group has been more of a group that I've been working on with my staff, and the way that group has been happening is we sent out a call for names that people would say, hey, this is an expert in wolf management or policy, and we have those names. We've reached out to the state or federal agencies that will be on that group, as well as a few other individuals, and we've just moved that list to the director and the chairman level as well, and they'll be reviewing those in the coming weeks. So good input there, and it's exciting to see that move forward. So those are the updates on those 2 processes. Again, we expect to have those both completed by the end of the month, if not sooner. And I would think at your next meeting, you'll be able to see the full list and hopefully maybe even have some of those people in attendance.
Okay, I'd like to take a pause there, see if there's any commission questions or comments on the update of SAG and TWIG. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. And so I spoke briefly with Reed at some point, and I think Reed felt it was more appropriate at our next meeting to talk about sort of more of the process of the role of these working groups as they relate to the commission and Keystone and how it all ties together. And so thank you, Reed. I look forward to that conversation. I just wanted to take this, and maybe you want to do this separately, but as an opportunity to address some of the things that I've heard so far today, listening especially to the public. And when I asked Ernest and the Keystone group about civility, that was my main concern in listening to today. I've gotten emails asking me to step down from the commission because I'm anti-wolf. And I want people to understand that couldn't be further from the truth. And what I would ask, the term I've seen used the most in all of the letters and emails and back and forth is things like liars. I would ask that we work on our terminology, we work on our language. There aren't any liars on either side. We all have our position. I think the commission is as wide open as I've ever seen a group in accepting and being willing to listen to all sides in this argument. And so I would hope that we can do the same with our stakeholders, that we can quit the name calling and the finger pointing and recognize our differences and respect those differences and listen. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Further commission questions or comments? Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's back to the mundane world after Charlie's words of wisdom. Reed, I wanted to ask if you have any views, taking the advice of our facilitators. I was trying to think what the county's best argument was for their request. And, I think it's that they do have land management authority and they are responsible for public safety, which makes them unique from some of the other interest groups. And I had suggested to one of the commissioners through a question that maybe the role for them would be on the technical advisory group. That's where similar governmental entities with land management authority and public safety responsibility are found. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, preliminarily, good idea, bad idea, or which way that you were receiving that idea.
Interesting question, Commissioner Touchton. I think just having worked with the creation of that technical working group, I do see that there could be a role there, especially from the land management perspective and land use perspective. That group, in my mind, are really kind of the nuts and bolts, the science behind that. And so, yes, I do see a place where they could sit at the table and provide some of the land use science. And if they do have, some of the counties do have very qualified scientists on their staff. So I could see that as a role as well. But to say one way or the other, I think would put me in a really tough spot. I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Reed. I think that's the questions about that topic at this time. So maybe move forward to the educational session.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate all the commissioners that were able to either attend virtually or watch the recording of our last educational session. We had two individuals, Dr. Diane Boyd and another individual, John Horn, Dr. John Horn from Idaho and Montana present. And I would encourage the public that are listening and if you've not had a chance to watch that is on our YouTube channel and available via our website. And it's a very good session. Just the way it happens is due to scheduling conflicts. These are busy folks, as you know. Our first intent was to come with a speaker to talk about the kind of the mechanics of reintroduction and how they did it in the Northern Rockies. And that will actually be the person at our next meeting. And we're going to bring in Ed Bangs, who was, he oversaw the Northern Recovery Program for over 20 years. And he will speak on May 20th about recovery in the Northern Rockies. And that will really be like, where did they get the wolves? How many? Where did they put them? How did they do EIS and those type of things to put the wolves on the ground? So I know we heard a comment earlier that we should do that, and that was our intent, but again, scheduling was difficult. So May 20th, starting at 6 in the evening, and then we'll wrap up probably around 8, if not sooner. And then the next session we have scheduled is for June 16th, and that will be a session that we're still building. And Corey Chick and his game damage team are working on that session. And that will be more around the prevention and control of damage, compensation programs in other state and those type of topics. So ask folks to put those two on their calendar. But before we build too far, definitely would like to hear feedback from commissioners who are able to attend or seen the previous one, if they any advice or anything going forward of things you'd like to see.
Thank you. So I'd open it up now to commissioner comments or questions about the first educational session. And Reed's thoughts, of course, about any thoughts about the future ones that are coming. That was Commissioner Hauser giving the thumbs up on the first one. For those who can't see this and might be listening.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, there you are, Commissioner May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The comments I would have on the first educational session are, I think the agency is almost in an untenable situation to appease everybody at one session. And I think we have to focus on the fact that we're trying to get deep into some details. And when we get taken off track, that we have to have a sympathy and sympathy from the public that we're trying to reach some conclusions in a short amount of time. And that's just during that session, but that over the course of the long haul, which we're all in for, we will eventually get to the information, the questions that people are seeking at the time that maybe it's not available. And I think that first session was a watershed moment that we can now go forward from there. We have that out in front that these are the topics that are going to be discussed at this session. And I think we have undue expectations that we expect to get to everybody's questions or thoughts in 1 2-hour session. But then we just have to have patience and go through this and realize that we're not taking this journey in one jump. We're going to take this journey in a million steps, and that's how we're behaving. So I think the education session is great. You know, that's where we start. We're laying the groundwork of help for all of us.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's excellent summary of what we did. It's a great start. Much more to come. Commissioner Schaefer.
I won't belabor it because Commissioner May largely hit on the points. I thought it was great. I think that it's really useful to get not just a scientific perspective of experts who have been doing this for decades, but also some of the personal perspective and their experience. And I think that, and particularly Diane Boyd, you know, there's only so many, she clearly conveyed there's only so many things you can control for. Understanding that this is an effort that is difficult and, you know, fraught with many unknowns, but it's also one where there's a lot of opportunity here. So I thought, you know, everything went great in my perspective. I look forward to the future sessions. And I think that the more folks that can join these via the online options should do so, because they're both entertaining but informative.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. I think Director Prinsloo would like to say a couple things.
Yeah, just thank you, Chair. Mostly want to thank Reed and his staff, really the whole leadership team who are working on this. But the education sessions, as an example, Reed and his staff and Jeff et al. Really working hard to try and bring the best information they can from the best experts around the country. I think you'll see that Ed Banks came as an example from Montana in the middle of reintroduction in 2004, 2005, talked to the original Wolf working group. And so at the end of the day, like I said, we're working hard on that. I do encourage, and I want to listen to the commissioners if there's certain things you want to hear or think we need to. The goal, obviously, is for everybody, not just the commission, but in the state to maybe Ernest House said that best, or Julie too, that ultimately you're gonna have to meet people halfway in a lot of this discussion. And so I appreciate that. I think education is a component of that. Obviously discussion at this, and maybe I'll leave you with, you know, one little piece of wisdom collectively, that courtesy is never out of style. And so let's remember that as we embark on this collectively. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Prinsloo. Commissioner Texton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quick echo, Reed. I thought it was excellent, and I thought Eric did an excellent job as monitor. One thing that occurred to me watching it is and I just wanted to make a note for us, is there are some areas of scientific unknown or dispute, and we are in a position to conduct, for lack of a better word, experiments or observations. And I just want to make sure that as we go forward, and you and your team would be much better at identifying these opportunities than someone like me would, but that we, you know, enable it's funding that we need to work on, but that we don't miss this opportunity to learn some of the things that people are arguing over, we could get some more information. So I just wanted to encourage us to do that as much as possible as we go forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchy. Director Prinsloo.
Yeah, I'll just add a little, a lot of moving parts to this, Commissioner Touchton, but we are looking on trying to bring on, Wolf researcher in this, because it won't be a one-touch thing and be a long-term forever thing. And so looking at the other staff too, and components much broader than that, but we are very much interested in your point and are pursuing that.
Thank you, Director Prinsloo. Reed, you have any start to our commission discussion about the role of the counties in this planning process, or I can just open it up to the commission for discussion and deliberation?
Yeah, I think that would be best, Mr. Chair. Before I leave the table, though, I would just like to continue to thank staff that are working on this. It's a team effort. That education session the other night, we had over 1,000 people registered. We kept over 400 through the call, and that last year, we didn't even know how to do that. It's pretty amazing that we brought in 2 speakers from out of state and had 1,000 people interested in attending. And so hats off to Lauren and her crew and the rest of the leadership team for all the effort that we're putting into collectively. So that's great to be part of it. So thank you.
Thanks, Ray. I know it was an enormous effort, and I add my thanks to all that made it happen. So with that, I'm sorry, Commissioner Haskell.
I just want to say one thing. I would like to recognize our legislature and say thank you for putting in 1.1 billion for putting this together.
Thank you, Commissioner Haskell. So I think with that, we are ready to move forward to commission discussion, deliberation, I'll call it, about the role of counties in the planning process. We received obviously multiple public comment with regards to that. So I would open the floor so we could talk about that proposal and get some commission feedback or provide that to Director Prinsloo and the staff, so we can start to move in a direction that might be workable for this reintroduction process. So open the floor for that. Commissioner Touchton.
Well, I'm never shy to start talking, so I'll start the conversation. I have some concerns with this proposal, and I imply as much with some of my questions. But we've gone to great time and expense to establish a stakeholder advisory group and a technical advisory group, and then an interest group, in this case counties, wants to opt out and have their own process, which is understandable, but as I read their arguments, I found them, with few exceptions, fairly superficial, that they describing differences without distinction. In the stakeholder advisory group, cattlemen might have to rely on the wool growers. The off-road vehicle enthusiasts might have to rely on some other form of recreation. It's ultimately everyone has to rely on a few folks, and I don't know why the counties would be any different if they couldn't channel their concerns through one or two representatives. As Ernest said, our BIPOC community frequently has an incredible diversity, frequently ends up relying on one or two folks, and that's just inherent in the process. So I'm a little down on this idea going into it, but one thing I had that I wanted to kick out there is political representatives in a lot of ways are conduits for the interests of their constituents. And I would like to cut out the middleman. I do think that West Slope ranchers in particular are among the most affected folks. And I would be more enthusiastic about having an advisory committee that went to the source and let us talk with the ranchers about sort of things that I think will come up down the road. And so that's my suggestion, is that we consider whether political representatives are the appropriate folks, or we ought to just go right to the folks on the ground and work directly with an interest group or advisory committee ranchers and other producers on an ongoing basis. So those were my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchy. Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this is a question probably for either Reed or Director Prenslow, and that is, I don't know the answer. I would have to think that this is not the first time this type of structure might have been suggested or that the agency has entertained. And so I just wonder, are there other models where groups that are particularly impacted have an opportunity to either address the commission or be part of a process outside of, in this case, the stakeholder group or the technical advisory group, whether that's before meetings or we dedicate time? I'm just sort of asking out loud if you could give us some, are we recreating the wheel, or are there models that we could look at from, prior initiatives like this, and whether or not it's in this agency or others? I mean, I was on the Blue Ribbon Commission for Healthcare Reform years ago, and that process, had a similarly very politicized dynamics to it, and so I just would have to think that there's ways that we can bring options and alternatives that would satisfy what I think this request asked us to consider.
Director Prenslow.
Always like to great questions. I for sure won't be the expert on that answer. Don't and won't claim to be. A couple things do come to mind. So yes, there are different processes, opportunities. I'm mulling the same thing over in my mind. A specific third group. This is more detail than you asked, but I create one. Somebody else is going to want one or two or three. So I understand that. I do completely understand County Commissioner's role in 1041 and land use, human health and safety, and they are in charge of that and elected officials for that. And so that's a valid point too. There again, I'm not going to dump on them, but we're going to pay our facilitators for that, and they're probably a lot more expert in this field of process than I am, and I'm a very process-oriented person. Anybody will tell you that, but so I would look help with that. My goal really is not to make a firm decision today on your question. I think I want to hear the discussion of the commission. I think it would be helpful to my staff, myself, and after that discussion to sit down with our facilitators on this. They had a plan. They had one of the reasons that Keystone won this contract. Not only they have a good track record, but they are on the West Slope, and they have a plan to go to basically every county, on the West Slope. So at some level, and not putting it's just a memory thing. So the second part of the question, I would say, so I think that decision is a few days away, really not today would be my recommendation. Second, I am aware, at least at some level, of other state agencies where, and I could envision something like this, where county commissioners specifically at the commission level might be afforded a standalone, hour or two or session in front of the commission, especially at major touch points within the next planning and implementation phase. And there are differences in different counties, obviously in the West Slopes, for, against, just concern, human health and safety, whatever, that they could create, I won't say voting blocks, but groups within themselves come in and represent. I think the Oil and Gas Commission has done things similar to that, where one portion of counties or communities would come in and support and one would not, but the commission could hear those within the county commissioners specific only. Now, everybody obviously gets to hear that conversation. There is no decision authority. The commission is the decision authority on that, but it would open that opportunity up that it is, again, a unique role of county commissioner. So it's a rambling answer, but there's multiple ways that I think we can look at that.
and should. Thank you, Director Prinsloo. Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would largely agree with those, particularly the last point that Director Prinsloo made, that there's some other avenues that probably are available. One of the things that I heard from particularly the commissioners that testified was, the desire to have something akin to cooperating agency status, which they have with anytime they want to with federal land management agencies, which provides for different processes than the public has, an ability to review and comment on decision documents in advance. That seems to be a different sort of question or request than the local government working group. That's where I get stuck, just to be honest with you. I don't know what that would look like and how that would work in combination with the stakeholder working group and the technical team. I do believe that counties have an outsized role, particularly on the Western Slope, when it comes to particularly land management affairs or natural resource decision making. And I think that's appropriate given the reliance upon natural resources for our communities. But to me, like, the process question is where I get stuck. Process and sort of instrument in order to get there. I do support the idea that there is a little bit more of an opportunity for an intensive process with these counties, though. It is a different situation than it is elsewhere. And to Commissioner Hauser's point, we would expect that in other parts of the state. So I think that there is a path forward here. I think that as Director Prinsloo mentioned, though, we need to spend some more time figuring out what that path is.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you mentioned earlier, I think that this commission is extremely well equipped to hear all sides and to really listen. And we, as a commission, it has not been lost upon us that there is a concern on the West Slope that they were not the people who voted for 114, that they were the people most impacted by 114. We're listening, and we hear it loud and clear, and we'll continue to hear it, and we will never discount that fact. We're listening to all sides. I found it interesting today, one of the commentators asking for representation made a comment, we are already represented by J.T. Romansky. And I thought, well taken. And also, Corey is representing the Western Slope. If you look at the list of counties that are on that list, they're not just Northwest, they're Southwest as well. And we have regional managers and we have staff that are listening. And so they are represented. And, in talking with Reed today about the role of these working groups and how they're going to relate to the commission, whether it be directly or through the division, is something that the division is still working on. And I think this is just another piece of that puzzle that we need to let the division work through. We're very good at letting the division bring recommendations to us, and this is a good example. I'd like to see the division work through how we deal with this particular issue. And it's clear from Director Prinsloo that they are working through it, and it is difficult, and it's going to be a difficult decision-making process. It's also never forgotten that I was one who originally thought we should have a commissioner on the working groups. And we were told no. And you know what? I think in hindsight, that was the right answer. So it pays for us to listen. And so I think our job at this point is to sit back and listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. We have just one moment, Commissioner Black. I just wanted to add that I think that the idea of giving the agency time to reflect and provide us possible alternatives for the roles of the counties is an excellent one. And because the process is still also being designed. I mean, Keystone just came on. We haven't given them a chance yet to figure out how the county and what the roles are. But I would also strongly state that I believe the county should have an outsized role. They are representative elected or elected representatives of constituents in those counties. And this is happening on the Western Slope. In some way, somehow, whether it's hearing before the commission, like Director Prinslow said, an advisory group, an advisory council, whatever it turns out to be, there needs to be some kind of role where they can interact directly and play an important and critical part in the process. I didn't hear them ask for decision rights. I think they understand they don't have those. But at the same time, being able to actually play a part in the process rather than just getting information after it's decided is, if we want to build that seed of trust, which I heard earlier today, that is going to be critical to happen. So anyway, Commissioner Blecker.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make a couple comments. A lot of the things I wanted to mention have already been mentioned. However, I'd like to reiterate a few things. As a former county commissioner who represented a small rural mountain community on the West Slope, I fully understand the county's desires and, I say, perceptions of lack of adequate representation in these conversations. I'm empathetic to that. However, I feel that this particular situation does not, I don't think we should move forward with this third advisory group. Like what people have said before, there's other ways that folks can participate. And I think creating a third group takes away what we've already decided on. It's taking away our process that we have created and just started like just a few months ago. So I would like to keep this in-house with our decisions that we've made up to this point. I think that there is room to include the county commissioner demographic in a variety of ways. I mean, even today, we made the accommodation of giving them 2 extra minutes to speak versus our other folks that came for public comment. And I know that's just a minor accommodation, but I just wanted to make that example. And I know that we'd be willing to show up to a county commissioner meeting if and when invited. So I would like to see the agency not go with a full third committee, but maybe find another avenue of inclusion. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Adams.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate all that has been shared, and I agree that there does need to be recognizing that all stakeholder groups are not the same, and that having them, that there is an additional need for differentiation, particularly by those groups that have different rulemaking and governance responsibilities. And I think about the county commissioners in that role. I will say I do not support an additional stakeholder group meeting and would actually prefer some of the strategies that Director Prinslow identified that allow for multiple touch points throughout the process directly with that group, engaging not only with the commission, but also with our leadership. And in addition, want to amplify the extensive relationships that have been built over the decades between CPW staff and leadership and our county commissioners. But again, want to reiterate and appreciate the adaptive leadership that Director Prinslow is modeling in trying to identify even more meaningful touch points for county commissioner engagement throughout the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Further comments or questions with regards to this? I think I heard consensus, roughly, Director Prinslow, that we're going to punt this back to you and your staff. So, congratulations.
Consensus on that point, yes. But I believe we have direction.
The only thing I'd ask, I think that this is one of those things that doesn't do well sitting on the burner for long. I think at our next meeting, we should address this topic and hear recommendations or whatever for how we move forward. And I don't know if I'm putting Keystone in the spot too with regards to it, but I guess I am. And I think that that's appropriate because concern level is high, the timing is right, and there's a certain urgency to this matter so that we can, start to move forward more efficiently.
I hear you loud and clear and agree.
Thank you. So I think anything else, Reed, with regards to item number 26? No. No final comments then. We'll move forward to item number 27, which is discussion of commissioner officer elections. We're coming around to our cycle of 1 year being complete. Looking for starting this in May, because the election will we won't elect officers today, but that officer election will occur in June. So with regards to that, what we have looked for in the past with regards to officers, continuity, experience, previous expressed interest with regards to serving as officers. Looked at tenure. We've got to be careful with regards to that because certain commissioners will come off cycle before they could complete their officer election term. And then of course I look for support and so forth, how are they with regards to the total commissioner support for each other and so forth. So with that, I would open the floor to discussions around potential interests and so forth and who might want to serve. But I would throw out, since I always good to throw out some cannon fodder at the beginning to start the discussion. I believe a great slate for next year to be considered. We've had Commissioner Hauser serve as vice chair. I think it's appropriate that she move forward to the chair position. We discussed at length last year, Commissioner Garcia willing to accept the vice chair position moving forward. And I would also nominate Commissioner Schaefer to serve as secretary. So I think that's a slate we could vote on in June, and that would be one proposed slate to consider. But with that, I would also open the floor. Commissioner Haskin.
I think that's a great slate. They've been here for a while. Carrie's always great. And I think these meetings are going to be a little difficult in the future, unfortunately, with all of the wolf issues. And I think that would be a great slate of officers.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just, I've seen your role in the Herculean job you have. I was wondering if Commissioner Hauser, who are currently our vice chair and our secretary, could describe those positions because they seem to be behind the scenes quite a bit, and I'm not sure what the positions are involved in. So if we could go through like what the jobs are actually.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Commissioner Touchton. I do whatever Marvin asks me to do.
I only wish that was true.
No, I would say in all seriousness, there was some interest. The truth is it's backup, obviously. It's sort of pro temp. So if the chair has to step out or can't conduct a meeting, I haven't had to do that, but we saw that a couple of times under Commissioner Howard, who, when he was not available, Commissioner Zimmerman stepped in. So that's really the role. Marvin asked me to do a little bit on governance this year, and so where that was appropriate, I tried to do that prior to having our consultant come in. So that's mostly the role as far as I know, and it's a tee-up. If there's continuity from vice chair to chair, you get a year to observe and sort of practice and get your Roberts rules up to snuff and be ready for the following year. So there may be Jake or somebody else there might be actually more formal roles, but I believe hopefully that captures it.
Jake, do you want to speak to that, or do you have any additional comment? No. I just would want to reiterate, even though, obviously there's 3 officers, we're very careful around the open meetings aspect of it. So the commissioners don't meet separately to discuss any items of business that are on the agenda and cannot do so. So that's why there's this separation of duties. With that, I see Commissioner Adams.
Yes, hello. I am definitely excited about the ascension of Commissioner Hauser in the role of chair. I am interested in serving in an officer role. Didn't hear treasurer. Is that not a role that we have? Is it only chair, vice chair, and secretary?
Yes, Commissioner, the head of the Finance Committee is appointed by the chair, but is not an elected officer position by the commission.
Okay. So then my only real options are secretary, vice chair, and chair then. Is that my understanding?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, then in that case, I'd like to throw my name in the ring, or hat in the ring for consideration for the vice chair role. And happy to, talk more about that as the elections approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Oh, Commissioner Haskett.
I was fine. I can just say ditto what carries. The only other thing is really just looking at the minutes and signing all of the reg changes and things like that.
Was Commissioner Touchton?
Well, I wanted to get back to what the secretary's duties were. But my other question is, I assume all us new guys who are unconfirmed are ineligible for all of this position. So that's just an assumption that we have tenure issues as well as people who are at the other end of the spectrum, correct?
I'm not sure how that would work. Maybe Jay can answer that question.
I think practically speaking, that makes sense, but I don't think it precludes you from participating in any role if you, get off the commission for whatever reason. You just be replaced.
With that response, Commissioner Touchton and any of the other commissioners that are not yet confirmed, again, you can express your interest here today to self-nominate for a specific position, or you can express that interest to, again, because of the open meetings rule, you can express that interest to Director Prinsloo, and then we can bring that forward at the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, I might just say that no, I definitely would not put my name in for anything. I need more experience, plus we need to get through the confirmation process. So I would not choose to be considered for anything like that, and I appreciate the people who are willing to serve at the time that you're ready for. Well, this isn't an action item, it's information, but I definitely agree with the slate that you put forward.
Thank you, Commissioner May. So I think we've again, we put this out in open. It will come forward to the commission in June for actual elections. Any other questions? Oh, I see two there. Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say I would gladly serve if chosen to do so, and I'm limbering up my signing hand. So hopefully that will help.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. Commissioner Phillips.
Yes, I just want to echo what Dallas said, very much in the same boat. I feel like defer to people who've been here longer and also echo the slate that you put forward and voice strong support for those three individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Phillips. Commissioner Touchton.
I'm just going to say me too with Duke and Dallas. I didn't mean to imply anything by asking. I assumed that we were eligible.
So I think that concludes the discussion around officer elections. Can't believe we're ahead of schedule, but it's great because there's a couple other items we need to deal with today here at this time. Number one, we discussed at length yesterday, or at least some length yesterday, the code of conduct that we removed from the consent agenda. And reflected on that last night. Certainly appreciate and recognize your concerns, Commissioner Adams. But I do feel we have a need, as we have a gap without the code of conduct policy. That policy has been out for draft and notice to the public twice. This is the third time it's out there in front of this commission. It was provided to the public. It was drafted on the advice of counsel. and aligns with the statute. So I believe what we need to do is handle that code of conduct by asking for a motion to approve the code of conduct policy as it was previously presented in the consent agenda and as recommended by staff. And there's always an opportunity to amend or change that at a later time if necessary, but having a valid and code of conduct policy on record, I think is important for this commission. So I'd ask if there is support for a motion at this time.
So
Moved by Commissioner Haskett, second by Commissioner May. Discussion, Commissioner Garcia.
No, simply we have great legal counsel.
Thank you.
Thank them for the work that they did in drafting those. That's what they're good at. They did a very good job. Thank you.
So with that, I would ask for a vote. We probably ought to do a roll call vote on this one. Laura?
Okay, Adams,
No.
Fletcher,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Haskett,
yes.
Hauser,
Yes.
May,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Hutchton,
Yes. I'd like to say something, move a gun vote.
Marty,
Yes.
Chairman McDaniel,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. Commissioner Touchton, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just understand we need a code in place. That's why I voted the way I did. And I understand also that, let me back up. I think CPW is a superior state agency, and that we hold ourselves to a high standard. And I would like us to have a superior code of conduct that holds us to a very high standard. We need a baseline, and I'm glad we put a baseline in effect, but I would like us to return to our code of conduct in the future. And I know it's legally sufficient, but we do, as our attorney advisors, have the ability to put a few more restrictions on ourselves, and I'd like us to think about doing that down the line.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchton. You've actually given me a great segue to what we typically do in the meeting, which is talking about requests we receive, regards to data or future topics for discussion in commission meetings. I've written down a few, and you just gave me one more, and it was already full. So this is obviously, and it has been every time, where we have demand exceeding supply when it comes to agenda time and duties and responsibilities of the agency. So let me just read these out to you and the approach that we're taking so far. Number one, we did get a request, I think it was Commissioner Tuxton, about providing additional details on the draw in the future. I think that that was provided this time, and I think what I heard is that's going to be available in the future as early as possible. So I think that fits in. It doesn't require more agenda time for us. I've got a request with regards to the continued request about regards to stakeholder engagement. A request around CPW and a review of our contracting purchasing, specifically as it goes to minority vendors. A request around educational programs. A request which I didn't hear answered, but maybe could be provided, more around the definition of DEI from Keystone. And then finally, looking back at our code of conduct again. I think three of these are a firm yes, and three we need to think about, maybe four yes, but detailed draw I talked about. We already have Justin working on our contract and purchasing review. I think based on the nods in the head, I think we can get from Keystone a definition around DEI can be provided to the commission. On the code of conduct, I'm not sure, maybe that's more of a maybe or a yes. Just one moment, Commissioner Garcia. That's something I think comments could be provided offline again, because commissioners can't speak to each other during the meeting. And this could be provided to the agency and determine whether a recommended change to the policy might come forward to this commission or not. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. I was just speaking with Jake, and again, I really depend heavily on these type of issues with our legal counsel. And he is more than open to have discussions with commissioners that would like to talk about those issues. And I think that would be a way to get for a good start. Sometimes I think, and I know Commissioner Touchton has talked about the middleman, but to talk to the division who then has to talk to Jake, who then talks to the division, we can cut that out. Jake's a good lawyer and he knows what we're doing. He knows what the commission does. So perhaps discussions with them would be fruitful.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. That's in line with what I just mentioned. Perhaps Commissioner Touchton and Commissioner Adams reach out to Jake, speak with him about the code of conduct policy, and determine whether we can make any appropriate or recommended changes to it, or leave it as adopted. Make sense? And then finally, we added the draw and allocations project, which is giant to this commission. So I'm again very concerned about what a capacity, capability of both the agency and the commission to tackle that, but it's going to be pretty difficult. What I did not mention, and it's still sitting there, but not yet figuring out how we might be able to get on the agenda, are two requests. One, an update on stakeholder engagement, and two, an update on educational programs. And I just want to make sure all the commissioners understand that I've heard these requests, and you asked what was the duties of Commissioner Touchton of the chairman. One of them is the agenda. So I'm trying to figure out how that might fit and when, but I want to make sure everyone understood they're not forgotten, but they're also not yet scheduled. And so I'll have to figure that out as time goes by. Did I miss any requests from the last day and a half? Commissioner Adams.
Yes, hello, this is Commissioner Adams. I didn't hear anything about the stakeholder engagement, so I've brought the issue up a couple of times. I've noticed that we have a lot of stakeholder engagement efforts, and it would be wonderful if we can get an overview of all of the efforts. And again, I've mentioned stakeholder fatigue as an issue that I've seen and experienced, but more so seen and heard from other constituents, or particularly from historically excluded communities who are excited to be a part of a process, but are feeling overwhelmed by the number of requests that are not coordinated, and they're all asking similar questions. And so would love to bring that. And I think the public would also could also benefit from hearing just, about all the different ways that they can engage in some of the key topics that we're talking about, in addition to wolves and trails and our newest state park. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Actually, I just said that the two things that we have, I have in front of me, but still have not reconciled about how we can get them on the agenda and what timing would be appropriate, was stakeholder engagement and educational programs, and a review of those. So yes, I have that on the list. And we'll continue to look at future agenda building and figuring out with regards to everything else that we have, how that might fit and when the agency could tackle those things.
Okay. And within that, Chairman McDaniel, I'm also wondering on that stakeholder piece, if we can get a deep dive or a section on just the different ways that we engage county commissioners as well. Just again, wanting to elevate so the public is aware, county commissioners aware, so that we're making sure that everybody has the right seat on the bus. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, any other listings? Well, then I think, sorry, Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I mentioned it last meeting, but if sometime in the upcoming meetings, we could get an update on the sort of reclamation and remediation efforts regarding the fires of last year, as well as sort of landscape health conditions for our wildlife. That'd be great. We mentioned it several times as part of the quota saying discussion, but would love to hear what our folks on the ground are seeing.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. Commissioner Touchton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It doesn't have to be next time, but relatively soon, I would appreciate an update on our conversations with our federal partners about our pre-listing 10J or whatever we call it, because that seemed integral to this whole wolf effort and my particular favorite, the Wolverine. But I'd like an update on are the feds still being cooperative with us, and how's that going?
Thank you. Reed, if I could do so, I probably wouldn't add that to this list, but would kick that over to you as you continue to fill out the wolf part of the agenda. That makes sense. Commissioner Garcia.
I'd like to see how much we could get on the open market for these glass partitions.
Well, unfortunately, you get what you asked for, and we already had a full agenda, Director Brinslow. I'm not sure how we're going to fit more in, and when we'll fit some of these items in, but I can promise all the commissioners will do our best to try to make it work with what we have on our slate, which is awfully big. So with that, I think unless there's any further comments or questions, this meeting will be officially adjourned, and I'll use the gavel. We're done.
Thanks, Chair.